The Broomfield City Council study session of October 15th, 2024 is called to order.
Good evening, council members. This is Nancy Rogers, a city and county attorney. The mayor is excused this evening. She is accepting an award on Broomfield's behalf. And Mayor Pro Tem is en route to the meeting. As you know, he is a teacher and he has parent-teacher conferences. Therefore, per council's rules, the council members that are here need to elect a temporary chair that can kick off the meeting. So if I could get a motion and you can move to appoint yourself as temporary chair for a meeting, for this meeting.
All right, I guess I'll move that I will be the temporary chair for the meeting.
That is Austin Ward for the record.
Yes, Austin Ward, Councilmember
I'm just
Ward.
kidding, Councilmember Ward. Is there a second?
I will second. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
All those in favor? The dais is yours, Councilmember Ward.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's study session. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at www.broomfield.org. And our agenda this evening includes one development update and 3 study session items. Seeing that there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. You can watch study sessions live on channel 8 and through our video streaming on broomfield.org/council meetings. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available through our AV team in the back of council chambers. So for our first item this evening, Joe Vostritz of City Street Investors and Tim Fredigill of Millender White, both from the Broomfield Town Square Alliance, are going to provide council with an update on the Broomfield Town Square development project. Mr. Vostrich and Mr. Fredigill, will you please come to the podium and provide us with your update?
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem-elect, or
I'll just take chair. I'll just take chair for right now.
Tim Fredigill, Broomfield Town Square Alliance. Joe wasn't able to make it this evening, but I have been sent here to deliver the news. Thanks for having us. Quick update. We are on a regular cadence to provide these updates. I believe it's every 6 months just to keep the public informed and council informed as to what we're up to with the project. With that, I was hoping we could page the next slide. Some recent events that's happened at the Broomfield Town Square. One, I don't know if you've already received an update on the Safeway building, but wanted to make sure you all heard the news that your staff did complete the re-roofing of the building as well as mitigation of the mildew in that building. I personally walked it. It smells like the thing went just through a car wash. So it's in really good shape, bone dry. They replaced, any roof decking that had been rusted out, replaced the old insulation on top of the roof decking and re-roofed, as well as removed a lot of the mechanical equipment that will not be used in the future redevelopment, just preparing again for the future use of the property. And additionally, this month, we presented at the APA National Conference. So the National Conference is here in Colorado, Loveland, a fairly big deal, presenting the Broomfield Town Square project. I was out of country, but Joe Vostries and a member from the Millender White team was there to present the cool things that are happening here in Broomfield. The audience there, I believe, is something like over 90% planners and staffers from across the country. So really good exposure for the city and county of Broomfield and the project. Next slide, please. Quick rundown. This is a regurgitation of some of the prior bullet points we had, as well as a refresh of schedule going forward. Going through the history of this past winter, what were we up to? It was September of last year, we received site plan approval. Immediately following that, it was, all right, buckle down, heads down, refresh the underwriting for the project for all of the uses, private uses around the property, as well as for the cost of the public improvements, the estimated bond proceeds that we would anticipate in today's market that would pay for those public improvements, that's been completed. And that goes hand in hand with the last bullet point you see there, which is capital sourcing. More on that in a bit. Additionally, we posted an RFP for an affordable housing project that will be part of a subsequent phase of the Broomfield Town Square, which we hope to accelerate so that it can piggyback on the dust being kicked up around the site so that we can deliver affordable housing as part of our initiative to actually deliver on our word to get affordable housing within this project and get that done in the near term, not as an afterthought 10 years down the road. So we sent out a solicitation, we got some good proposals. We are working through an MOU with staff regarding the language in our agreements as it pertains to affordable housing. Those are details. But the goal is to award the job to an affordable housing partner in the near term so that that partner can commence the process of the nuts and bolts of deliverables, site plan submittal, concept plan review, planning commission. This would be a site plan for a future phase. So that site plan has not been approved yet. So a new site plan would need to be submitted. And again, we'd really like to get this done lockstep with the first phase because it is immediately adjacent to the first phase. And we thought it'd be a tremendous add to the community to deliver again on our commitment to get workforce housing out at Broomfield Town Square. Moving on, I mentioned the Broomfield, the Safeway building. That's done, it's in great shape. Sorry, can you jump back to the last slide? I've got the notes here, but the primary deliverables as far as cost exposure goes has been construction document preparation for the master site plan for the first phase. So that's about a $40 million scope. That includes the lake, the boathouse. There's an ancillary building next to the tennis courts, which will be a new restroom, plus water treatment room, plaza, the boardwalk, all of the things that, where people are going to experience this place. And those construction documents are well underway. We've been working through any difficulties that, come with putting the fine details on what will be our permit set for review by staff. But those are in pretty good shape. We hoped to have those done this fall, like prior to year end. It's going to be pretty close. It might slip into first quarter 2025, which is where I've placed the final deliverable for the permit submittal. So it could be January, it could be December, but it's looking pretty good. And that is a fairly healthy scope as far as engineering goes and landscape architecture. It's over $1 million package as far as work product goes. So we're out there spending significant dollars to advance the project. And thereafter, what's the next core deliverable? That would be financing the apartment community, the active adult age restricted community, and the market hall. That is a process that is ongoing. It's part of what we are doing on a daily basis is coffees, lunches, talking with brokers, capital partners, looking for the right fit for our private components of the project. As many of you are probably aware, we're in a little bit of a capital markets, I wouldn't say freeze, but it's pretty cool out there right now. So raising private capital for ground up development is challenging in today's world, but we're out there in the streets. We do have good looks by, many credible, strong capital partners, but getting to that next step of, hey, we're executing operating agreements and proceeding with the project is the next step. So that's where we're at. And we will continue to push on the financing, the private financing front, just as much as we can. The construction of the project, to refresh your memories, will, at least the first phase of the Broomfield Town Square, will all go in one fell swoop. So it's the site work with the $40 million package I referenced earlier, the apartment community, the active adult, age restricted community, and the market hall. All of that will go as one. To sell the bonds, to finance the public infrastructure, we have to have financing, not just maybe identified, but locked, done. You're ready to close to sell bonds in today's market. I know you all might be doing some activities with respect to bonds in the near future. Rates are up, markets, inflows into the market are soft at a minimum. But we are in a better spot than where we were, rewind 12 months ago. You were seeing massive outflows for the bond markets, but it's appeared to have found its footing. And again, to sell those bonds, capital's got to be locked, ready to roll on the private components of that project as well. So that's where a ton of my time is focused. Next slide, please. Moving forward, as far as action items for council and the URA goes, I'm going to jump to the bottom bullet, which is May 6th. 2 elections per year. You got the November election coming up. You got the May election. We still have one step with our public finance process, which is the creation of the Business Improvement District. And that is the end goal there for May 6th. The bullet points above are how we get there from here. February 11th is the proposed date for taking council action on our land transfer to petition for organization of a business improvement district. You need to have qualified electors for the election. To be qualified, you need to own real estate. That's the transfer of that real estate is the February 11th hearing. And that's the time at which council would vote to transfer land to the Broomfield Town Square Alliance to qualify the electors so that we may form the Business Improvement District. February 25th, these are, and March 23rd, these are just steps, again, to meet that end goal. So we'll petition for organization, we'll file an operating plan or submit an operating plan for your review, as well as take the URA plan amendment to vote. The URA plan has a couple things that need to be tweaked, particularly with respect to URA boundaries to meet the boundaries of our project. So there's a little bit of re-racking around the periphery of the existing URA plan. And you'll see the second vote there in March of 25. So when you'll see us next, unless you ask us to come up to refresh, y'all for another update prior to year end or in January, next time you'll see us is probably February, early February for that land transfer. Again, taking steps to form the Business Improvement District. Metropolitan districts are already formed. And as you know, the public finance agreement's already done and executed. So with that, I know we're not taking public comment. Are we taking council questions though, I'd imagine? Okay.
All right. So that's the end of your presentation?
Yes, sir.
All right. Wonderful. Well, next are questions and comments from City Council. Do any of my council colleagues have questions or comments? Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. And thanks so much for the presentation. Obviously, 6 months has passed by and I keep asking questions about, are we on pace with the project itself? Will there be any potential delays?
We're, as far as pace goes with the construction documents on the site plan and the master development work, all of that's tracking fairly well. As I mentioned earlier, we were hoping to have the permit submittal in prior to year end. That may be first of next year, but that's on track fairly well. I would say on the capital raise for the private developments, that's behind schedule. And that's just a function of the market. We're robo-dialing capital and again, taking as many lunches, coffees, and beers as we need to with prospective capital sources. Again, very good interests. To the extent of like out of state investors having made site visits. So it's real progress, but I would have hoped that we would be to the point of onto operating agreements by this point. Capital markets aren't there. So just got to keep at it.
Yeah. And I guess on the subject, of the capital market, would this impact, I guess, once we, approve the construction proposals, we go through that process. what ideally would happen once, like in the most ideal world in 2025, 6 months from now, what would be like the reasonable area we should be is, I guess, my question.
Yeah, I would hope by this time, 6 months from today, we've got our capital partners sourced. We're midstream on construction documents on the apartment, active adult, and market hall. And we are shopping for debt. Debt is more available. We do have term sheets actually in hand for debt. My earlier comments were more reflected to equity, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
So it would be debt selection and then moving into lender due diligence. They get in the weeds, and that can be anywhere from a 3 to a 6 month process, depending on how particular that lender is. And moving on to construction, executing the construction loan and getting ready for a bond sale. So best case scenario, it's looking that would be a close in late next year, based on the timelines it takes to advance construction documents from here to the finish line. We're at we'll call it early DD if anybody's in the architecture engineering world. So quite a bit of ways to go, very large buildings to get to permit set. And that's I think the long pole in the tent there is getting the construction documents done, ready to permit. That's going to be a condition for the lender to close.
Yeah.
And that's what they're going to want to see.
And, last question, many residents, obviously, they've noticed about the Safeway now, old Safeway building, all the art going up, and some folks have noticed some construction around the area. And they keep asking me, like, what is the potential time when Town Square could be available for residents? And I know that's a far away, years in advance, but they just ask for that date.
Yeah. So from the time we break ground, it's feasible that you have your first building open within 24 months. So you're going to see a goal that we heard from staff and the community and council was open this cohesively.
Yeah.
So you're going to see 20 acres turned up when we start construction, with all of these projects going simultaneously. So we can turn it over as a package. Safety, livability, traffic, all of the normal logistics. So that's a rough timeline of where we'd be.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Lim.
Yes. You said you have the construction engineering documents underway. Staff hasn't seen them yet for especially the lake area. You've done that? And go ahead.
Sorry. Couple pieces to the lake area. The lake design itself is, we'll say, fairly straightforward. It's a bentonite liner over the grading plan. So the grading plan is established for the lake. So moving on to construction documents, it's just some fine details. We are moving forward with a different consultant for the construction documents for the lake in particular, which will be a very small set of plans than the consultant we previously had. Something that has to do with just schedules, to your point. So had to do some gymnastics there to find the right fit to advance those plans to go. But the lake geometry is set. From here, it's more of a sheet of details with respect to how the liner works, and then specifications for the aerators, microbial treatment, and then that all ties into the landscape sheets for the vegetation. So it's not, the lake is, I hate to say it's not a big part of what we're doing, but it's a less than 2% of the total sheets of construction documents that will go in.
Okay. Well, certainly from our end, there were a lot of questions of the feasibility, and I thought there were some construction questions that you're talking about the liner, and I thought there were some questions about.
I don't know that we've had any major construction challenges in the lake.
Okay, that's good to know. So you're in August, August. I have a note, Mr. Romine told us that horizontal construction work would begin in the second half of 2025, I guess a little sooner than what you're talking about right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fair. Critical path is locking equity to advance the construction documents, and that will flow through to completion of construction documents, which ties to closing of your loan and sale of the bonds. So because that equity raise is going slower than anticipated, that equity process is taking longer than expected. So as far as if we had $40 million in a bank account, could we start construction second half or even first half potentially of 25? Yes. But again, it's about closing the rest of that financing.
Okay.
Am I making sense there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Then no, that's what I wanted to hear was if things were off and what was the problem? You explained that again. So staff had told us that there were at least 2 CIP projects in 2024 that were necessitated by the upcoming beginning of construction. That was my understanding. So that if construction is not happening as soon as we anticipated, even as recently as August, are those projects getting delayed?
They are not. And that's one of the complicating pieces is when we are on someone else's timeline, but we anticipate that it's coming because council approved the project, whether it's 25, 26, 27, or 28, we have to be able to have those components that are ready and activated, if you will. While I appreciate Mr. Frederick-Gill's conversation about the lake, those are major components for us, that infrastructure with regards to the design, not functionality, nothing post when the liner goes in, but everything that leading up to that along our drainage it's significant. So Councilmember Lim, it wouldn't make sense, and staff has looked at it consistently on would their delay in capital impact our timeline with regards to that infrastructure? And fundamentally, the answer is no. Simply because it's inevitable, because council's approved the project, that the project is going to move forward. And we can't consistently be moving those big CIP projects, particularly with regards to water and infrastructure, to meet the timeline of bonding and financing.
Okay. So but certainly whatever we are doing with the infrastructure that we need to do, if we do it now, there won't be anything that needs to be changed when they come forward in however long they do it.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's preparation.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim, and thank you to my council colleagues for your flexibility tonight. This week is teacher conference nights, parent-teacher conference nights. So I was a bit busy this evening. But next on the list, we have Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just have one question. I'm going to ask this every time you all come before us until the project is finished. Do you anticipate any more public financing needed on our end in order to support the project?
No, I was not here at the prior staff update that Joe gave. I believe it was 6 months ago, but I heard that question came up. Unless you're willing to offer it, and of course we'll take it. But at this point, no, we're with respect to completion of the site package and those plans for permit submittal. Those are being prepared in coordination with a general contractor's pre-construction services to offer budgets that tie to that. At this point, you know, it's an iterative process, right? But at this point, our latest round of bond underwriting was very close to where we need to be, like within a margin of error that you would expect at this point in the process. So at this point, no, we don't see a need for that. I would note that with respect to the affordable housing project, that will not be a request of our team. We'll be partnering with an affordable housing group. But that project, as you've seen in other affordable housing projects, have a capital stack that's got 10 layers in it, and they get state grants and LIHTC financing and you name it. I do know that they would love financing from any source available to help deliver on affordable housing here. But what fashion that comes together, definitely beyond my pay grade. And I wouldn't even know what specific tool they'd be targeting. But I do know that in speaking with multiple affordable housing developers and reviewing their underwriting, you can see layer 1 of financing, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a couple of them that are sort of like question marks, and that's apparently pretty typical of their process. They're not going to have every pot of money identified and filled at concept. And some of those details get filled in as they go. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other council member questions, comments for this agenda item? Seeing none, thank you for the update. Yes. Yes, of course. I'm sorry. Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to make a point because I was looking at my calendar to make sure I put these on my calendar, and March 23rd is a Sunday. The next Tuesday is the 25th, when you were saying.
Oh, with the last slide?
Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
sure.
So we'll have to figure that out. March 23rd. Thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments from Borough or from council? All right, seeing none. Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item this evening is a discussion regarding an expedited review process for income-aligned residential developments. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin our discussion.
Thank you. And making her way down to the podium is Lynn Merwin, Deputy Director of Community Planning, and Shelby Donahue, our new Principal Planner. Ms. Merwin.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. The study session this evening is to present City Council opportunities for updating the Broomfield Municipal Code development review requirements to establish an expedited review process, also referred to a fast track process. Next slide, please. In November of 2022, Colorado voters approved a ballot measure referred to as Proposition 123, authorizing the state to retain money from existing state tax revenue to support investment in affordable housing, or what we all refer to here as inclusionary housing. Proposition, or Prop 123, creates significant funding for inclusionary housing. The funds are split with 60% allocated to the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and 40% allocated to the Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA, through the Division of Housing. There's quite an alphabet of acronyms here. OEDIT, I hope I pronounced that right, manages the Affordable Housing Financing Fund, and the Colorado Housing and Financing Authority, or CHAFA, serves as contract administrator. Again, this new funding is to support the accelerated creation of affordable housing across the state. Next slide, please. Prop 123 requires local governments to have implemented a fast track approval process for qualified affordable housing projects if they wish to remain eligible to access Prop 123 funding opportunities. DOLA has issued guidance interpreting the state statute for fast tracking, which we have consulted closely in developing our proposed fast track processes. And again, we're just very much at the concept stage here for developing a proposal. DOLA has issued guidance, a key requirement is that local governments must have a fast track process in place by November 1st of 2026. Eligible projects include those that provide 50% or more of their units as affordable. And affordable includes rental units provided at 60% of area median income, or AMI, and for sale units provided at 100% AMI. Local governments reviewing an eligible development application must reach a decision on the application within 90 calendar days. And I'll provide more detail on this in a moment. The process is optional for the developer. However, when the developer does opt into the fast track process or processes, all applicable parties, including the developer's team, Broomfield staff, and the external review agencies, must prioritize meeting strict deadlines during the 90-day review period. Next slide. The 90 calendar day clock starts when the application is deemed complete by the local government, and the clock ends with a final decision of approval with or without conditions or denial. Determination of a complete application is made by the local government, and each local government has the autonomy to establish local policies and procedures that meet or exceed the minimum criteria set by Prop 123. The clock must run continuously. However, DOLA guidance has determined there are two opportunities to extend the 90-day clock. In the first case, the developer can request one 90-day extension to comply with a state law or court order, or to address comments from an agency that has approval authority over the project. In the second case, the local government, that would be Broomfield in this case, may request one or more 30 calendar day extensions to work with a developer on addressing comments on the application. Next slide. Based on the zoning and any zoning overlays that may apply to a property, the project may be eligible to participate in one or both of the development review processes, depending on what stage in the application they are. The first process or path is an administrative review. This process applies to properties with Euclidean zoning, such as R3 or R5, and with no urban renewal area plan overlay. This process is already in place today in Broomfield, but would be subject to the 90-day clock to arrive at a final decision on the application. In this case, the application is submitted for permit review by staff. There is no concept review, no neighborhood meeting, and no public hearing. And an example of this kind of application would be the Academy Place on 120th Avenue, just west of Main Street. Next slide, please. The second path applies to properties with PUD zoning or an urban renewal area plan overlay, and both conditions could also apply. These applications require a more robust review and public process, including a public hearing. These application types will most commonly include site development plans and urban renewal site plans. They will continue to require a neighborhood meeting, a concept review, and a public hearing. And aside from the fast track timeline to review these applications, the key change with this path is there would be no land use review commission hearing and no council call-up due to the 90-day time constraints. Instead, there's only time for one public hearing, and staff is proposing that this single public hearing be scheduled with City Council, who would make a final decision on the application. Next slide. This table presents a side-by-side view of the two paths and their fast track processes. In the first row shown in blue, both paths will require a robust pre-application phase. The key difference is the public hearing path requires the applicant to host a neighborhood meeting and complete a concept review prior to application, whereas the administrative path allows the developer to proceed straight to the application for permits. In the second row shown in yellow, both paths will include a formal review period. They are fairly similar, except the public hearing path will need to factor in time to prepare for the public hearing, such as preparing the agenda report, presentation, and completing public notice requirements. The administrative path will be able to allocate the additional time to a second review or longer review times and revision times. In the third row, again highlighted in green, the decision phase is different for each path. The public hearing path proposes to require the one public hearing before City Council, with Council having that authority to make a final decision on the application. By contrast, the administrative path, as is in effect today, will result with a decision by city staff similar to today's practice. In the final row, showing the post-approval phase, we see that these paths are very similar. The applicant would pay applicable fees and finalize any remaining details prior to Broomfield issuing permits for construction. I will note that a property with PUD zoning, for example, is required to follow both the public hearing process path as well as the administrative path. So the The first path would be to get their site development plan approved or their urban renewal site plan approved. And once that was approved, they could start another 90-day clock to go through the permitting review process. And that is guidance that we've received from DOLA that they could follow 2 different fast track processes consecutively. Next slide, please. The next 3 slides present the same information in 2 different formats, and this slide lists the key steps chronologically. If we could please proceed to slide 9, this will provide a visual sense of how the proposed timing would work as I walk us through a typical public hearing review process. So next slide, please. Thank you. In this sample 90-day timeline, we see the first 45 days in calendar view, again, very hypothetical. In week 1, the application is submitted, reviewed and accepted for completeness, and referred out for review by staff and referral agencies. The reviewers then have 8 days to review and comment on the application. On day 16, the comments are provided to the applicant. The applicant then has 10 days to respond to comments. The review cycle is repeated 1 additional time. On day 45, which is on the lower right corner of this slide, Broomfield distributes final comments and identifies any outstanding issues, which will likely become staff recommended conditions of approval. Next slide, please. Here we see the next 45 days. During week 8 or days 48 through 52, the applicant will review and accept or seek to resolve the staff recommended conditions. On or about day 55, staff and the applicant begin the public hearing preparation phase. Staff drafts the agenda report and the applicant and staff work together on those public notice requirements. During week 12, the agenda report is finalized and published. On approximately day 80, the presentation is published. Between day 84 and day 90 in this scenario, a public hearing is held and City Council makes a final decision to approve or deny the application. Next slide, please. This slide highlights in the bright pink color where we might expect to see the time extensions added if needed. And there's a lot more information than you really need to digest here, but focusing on those bright pink colors. We anticipate the first extension could potentially be requested by the applicant after they receive the first review comments. The additional 90 days should allow ample time for them to address any comments. If needed, staff may also request 1 or more 30-day extensions. We believe a 30-day extension by staff could potentially occur after staff's recommended conditions are issued to the developer. The extension, again, would allow additional time to discuss and come to agreement on the outstanding requirements or conditions for the application. Next slide. Okay, to date, staff has developed this conceptual draft of the fast track processes, which I outlined in this presentation and in the accompanying agenda report. Before this study session, we reviewed the conceptual proposals with Broomfield staff involved in the development review process. We also shared the conceptual process with DOLA staff and the Broomfield Housing Alliance. DOLA and BHA have provided favorable initial feedback that the conceptual processes appear to meet the intent of Prop 123 of the Prop 123 fast track timeline. Preliminary comments from these meetings will be considered and likely incorporated as the formal ordinance is drafted. Should council direct staff to continue pursuing a formal ordinance for the fast track, the next step will be engagement with a broader range of stakeholders. And this engagement is expected to occur through the Broomfield Voice and technical workshops. After the stakeholder engagement and the formal ordinance is drafted, staff anticipates 1 additional study session with City Council, followed by the 2 readings of the ordinance and a public hearing. As discussed previously, this process must be in place by November 1st of 2026. Okay, so in concluding my presentation, we have 2 questions for council to consider when providing feedback this evening. So recognizing that Broomfield is required to have established a fast track process as a condition for seeking Prop 123 funding for local projects, the first question is, would council like staff to bring forward an ordinance that would establish a fast track review process or processes for eligible income aligned housing projects? And then the second question is, does council support the proposal for City Council to serve in the decision-making role for approving with or without conditions or denying fast track inclusionary housing proposals? I would note that this approach of council approving the application would remove the Land Use Review Commission from the fast track reviews due to the time constraints imposed by Prop 123. As an alternative, city council could direct staff to designate LURC instead of city council as having that final review authority if that is preferred. But we do not believe it would be possible to accommodate both a LURC and a city council hearing, even a council call-up within the 90-day timeframe. So that is where we stand tonight, and we're here this evening to accept your feedback and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, staff, for your presentation. Does any member of council have any questions or comments for this agenda item? Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I was wondering if you could review the carrot and stick part of this, the Prop 123 funding. What would be available to us?
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. The Prop 123 funding is funding allocated by the state for those communities who've opted into certain triggers. Essentially, if we create a certain number of units over a 3-year period, which was committed to last year, then various grant and loan opportunities through different organizations with the state. So DOLA, OEDIT, CHAFA, those various funding programs are available to developers, to us here at the city, and to the housing authorities across the state. So those opportunities vary depending on what the organization is and what the program is. As an example, the down payment assistance program that we just stood up is partially funded by that fund.
Did I understand correctly? This only applies to developments that have 50% affordable housing?
Correct.
I can't recall any developments that were 50%. It seems like they're either 10 or 100.
There is a minimum threshold of, yes, 50% of the units.
So it only apply to ones that are 100%
50 and above,
reasonably.
yes.
I don't think we get 50% proposals. So there would mostly be Broomfield Housing Authority proposals, correct? Reasonably?
Given our current list of projects, yes.
Okay. So most likely going forward, these would just be Broomfield Housing Alliance proposals, which tend to be the only ones that would meet the criteria. Just to reiterate that.
Yes, there, the one, one exception there that comes to mind is Ulysses Harvest Hill, because they are proposing 100% of their units. If they get that subsidized down to the 60% AMI averaging, then that project, those units would meet.
And I wanted to just ask about the commitment, which I believe in the memo says 56 units per year, which is based on a percentage, which of course, if we're able to do that, a percentage, the number we commit to just keeps going up every year. 3% just becomes 59, 63, perpetuates forward.
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, at the beginning of that commitment date and that 3-year period out, it's a set number of units per year for that 3-year period. And then at the end of that 3-year period to recommit, yes, you would do a recalculation.
So we'd be committing over 3 years. Is it 56 per year?
Yes.
So over 150. What if we don't reach that?
If we do not reach that commitment number at the end of the 3 years, what we've been advised by the state when we were considering whether or not to opt in is that Broomfield would essentially sit out a year in terms of our partners and ourselves being able to access those dollars with the various grant funding programs or loans.
Do we have a track record of producing 150 affordable units over 3 years? Or is that a bit of a stretch?
Depends on the year. I would have to ask for some help on, do we have the average? Okay. The average that we've created. We're trying to figure out the average that historically we've created in order to answer your question. So that will likely have to get back to you on in terms of the pipeline units that we're expecting to come up over the next couple of years. I think we have, if it's slide 15, if I heard correctly, we have some pipeline figures available. It might be back one. It looks like it's 14, please. That's right. There we go. So that is our pipeline now with units that would be 60% AMI.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Councilmember Lim?
Yes, could legal explain if staff generates these conditions of approval, what is council's ability to respond to those conditions of approval in considering the development?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Lim. Council still has the authority to move forward with those conditions of approval or modify them or reject them. As we're talking, their conditions for approval, they still are proposed until the application is approved by council or if delegated by LERC.
Okay, so what would be the difference between these? Well, okay. It would be staff proposing the conditions of approval instead of infrequently where council has added conditions of approval. And would council have the ability to say yes to one condition of approval, but no to another condition of approval in that process?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And it would still be judged by the same arbitrary and capricious standard that you have on any land use decision. It's just on that shorter time frame.
Okay, so we would still have the same, we would still have the same criteria to use as a basis for evaluation. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. The process of asking for an extension by the local government seems vague. Is it vague as it's defined at the moment by the state? It seems a little vague as far as if you can apply for multiple calendar extensions also. Is that, or do you have a more specific understanding of what that would involve?
It is vague. The guidelines are vague. It simply says a local government may request one or more 30-day extensions to address comments, issues that need to be resolved as part of the review process.
So it's vague. Does that mean they'll be lenient in allowing it? I mean, what kind of
We're
feel do you have
requesting it
for
of
that?
ourselves. We don't have to go to the state to request the 30 days. We're building
Oh,
it
okay.
into our process. So in the ordinance, we would allow for staff to request a 30-day extension to, just hypothetically, revise the lighting plan to have the light limits, the light foot candles meet policy or standard or whatever the case is. Revise the landscape plan to comply with the landscape ordinance. With only 2 opportunities to review, we're not real optimistic that we're going to get a perfect set of plans after 2 reviews. So we need the ability to recommend conditions of approval to say, hey, the landscape plan doesn't comply. Whether there are a number of factors or we just cite the section of code or, a chapter or something like that's to be determined. But we do think we're going to need the ability to outline all the places where the traffic report needs to be updated to factor in XYZ. So those are scenarios where we might need to ask for more time to resolve them or factor them into conditions of approval.
Okay, that makes sense. So when the applicant asks for an extension, is that self-regulated by the applicant too? There's no,
They would ask us, they would ask of the city process as allowed by the ordinance. And we would have to come up with a pretty detailed kind of timeline from there of, what they do with that 90 days. And they wouldn't have to use an entire 90 days, but they only get the one extension. So they have to be judicious about where they ask for that if they need to ask for it. We assume they would ask early because that's where the greatest number of comments are going to arise, but they could wait till the end and try and approach it differently.
okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem, if I may, so Councilmember Lim, so essentially this is a monumental shift, not only for municipalities, but also for the developers. So when you take something that is 9 months at best, and you go down to 90 days, having those conditions of approval, having as much not soft guidelines, but having those firm agreements on the front end, that's the only way that this is going to happen. That everybody agrees to on the front end, and then the execution piece is relying on those front-ended discussions. So the more opportunity to say, I don't like that, but I like it on this one, but I don't like it on this one. You're going to see, we have 6 municipalities that are listening to us right now because they want to use, hats off to our folks for being so far out in front of this. They want to use what this blueprint looks like. DOLA is paying close attention, obviously, because again, when you don't have those firm guidelines on the front end, not from a municipality perspective, but also from a DOLA perspective on those funds, it continues to diminish. So if the state doesn't have firm guidelines, and then the locals don't have firm guidelines, and then the developers are wondering how we're going to meet these the 90-day. I mean, all of us, when we look at that 90-day, it's like to say it's going to have to be high and tight is really an understatement.
Thank you. And these are, the Prop 123 funds are a protected fund at the state. These are not ones that may be taken somewhere else with the $900 million debt that the state's going to have.
To our understanding now, yes, these are funds that have been set aside. Again, this is related to the Tabor refund. So that's where the funding is coming from to fund Prop 123 funding for these various projects and opportunities. So I'm a little rusty on my process there, but I believe that would take another act from the legislature to reverse.
Okay,
If that
thank
sounds
you.
accurate.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you for the presentation and making it as easy as possible. I thoroughly, as a mom, enjoyed that calendar. I'm always calendarizing and it does fit well in my brain. I will have a question about that in a second. But the first question here is just more of a general question is we've always talked about how much money is available and how much money are we predicting here and how is DOLA figuring out all these different projects and how it's going to fit in and how much money are we going to be accessing and how is that determined? It seems like there's a lot that we have to kind of manage.
I can answer that as best as I can from our standpoint. What we've seen from DOLA just in the last year is that some of these funding opportunities are running out of funding fairly quickly towards the beginning of the year. You might recall you heard Ulysses Development Group speak to that effect when they were here earlier this year for the Harvest Hill project. There was a funding source that they were looking to apply and that ran out of funds, and now they're pivoting and being directed to another source and another grant opportunity at the state. So I believe as well there are a number of programs that are still in the process of being stood up at the state. under DOLA, OEDIT, and CHAFA altogether. I do not believe we've settled, so to speak, on what the menu of offerings, if you will look like at the state for these funds and these programs.
Okay, so how do we know how they're going to, like, let's say, make sure that Denver doesn't take up all the projects or whatnot? Is there a fair process that they have?
My understanding is for different programs and funding opportunities, there are different scoring criteria. So for example, the one that we keep using, Harvest Hill, that City and County of Broomfield City Council authorized us to apply for earlier this year as a grant opportunity with the Division of Local Governments under DOLA. That is actually a program that is related to communities with mineral rights. And therefore, in that scoring metric or matrix, there is a point allocation relative to the impact on our community by those mineral rights and that mineral activity. So per program and per funding opportunity, that scoring matrix is going to differ. But ideally, and I cannot speak for the state, of course, they would be having their own analysis, internal discussion, et cetera, on making those scoring criteria prioritize the projects that they want to prioritize, whether that's in a metro setting or a rural setting or both.
Okay. Are we planning on, this is sort of an additional question based on your answer, are we going to have a member from DOLA here at that first ordinance if we move forward with this? And I feel like I would like to know their scoring mechanisms before we even go through all of this process to access these dollars. If we're talking about there's different scoring with mineral rights, I had no clue about that. And if that's more valuable, quote unquote, land to use for drilling, and then maybe they won't approve it or something. Maybe there's something that will change in that regard. Could we have someone from DOLA here?
We're happy to invite DOLA.
Thank you. I love short answers. All right. Seems there's a lot of questions I have for that. And then another question too, well, I guess, let me say this before I move on, before I forget, is I would like to have the final say come from City Council. I think that was one of your questions. Mainly because we're the quickest one and we have to react to like an infill project or something like that. And we are the closest to the people. I mean, we are either elected or not based on those responses. So that would be my input for that. And then what happens if we don't act in the 90 days? And also, according to the calendar, like let's say we don't have a city council meeting and we have like a study session instead, are we going to have to add a city council meeting to make that within the 90 days? And then again, what would happen if we don't make those 90 days?
We have to make the 90 days. So everybody, including council, has to make the 90 days. But in all seriousness, if we can't make the 90-day process, I don't know if I know 100% what the consequences are, but presumably we would proceed. We would proceed to a complete application and final decision as soon as possible. But I think it could jeopardize our eligibility for funding down the line. I can't say with certainty. I don't think that guidance has been provided yet. But that's a question we could bring back to DOLA and make sure we understand better. Is what is the consequence? I mean, unless someone else has a better sense of that than me, but it's like all in or bust. But you do get these. I mean, I guess we could as staff, we'd have to test this with DOLA, but we could potentially ask for a 30-day extension for council, but I don't think that was part of the guideline. I think it was really to address an issue, like perhaps if there's an issue in there to be resolved and not just a scheduling matter.
And then I would like to agree with DOLA on a specific calendar, because I know we all have off as city council, during a certain amount of days, like even in December, we have to agree also too, are we going to put, a meeting, like might be different from Boulder than us, they have Indigenous Peoples' Day off and we don't, or, there's different types of calendars, so I think.
Yeah, that's something we'll definitely look at during the robust pre-application process, is we would map out the 90 days, much like we did in this calendar here, and look at those challenging conflicts and make sure that we could accommodate them. And, it might be we have to say, well, we don't think you should submit until this day, because that way we can get you to a hearing on that day, 90 days later. So we would work with the developer to build out that 90-day calendar and try and anticipate all the challenges along the way.
Yeah, gotcha. Great. I will probably have more questions, but that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Hinkle, if I can just, Ms. Merwin was right. The consequences funding. It's directly tied to funding, but it would worry me that somebody would use this as a basis to go to court to say you failed to consider this in the time, so you have to, so it's going to be deemed approved. So it'll be interesting to see what 106 cases come out of these land use hearings. But as far as Prop 123 is written, it's tied directly to funding.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just have one question that is probably a little obscure. Currently, if we have a rezone of a parcel like we did with, or not a rezone, but where we have to vacate a public right of way, that requires a ordinance, and that's 2 hearings. I don't think it's conceivable we could do those 2 hearings within that 90 days, but that's my assumption, correct?
We could,
Okay.
but that's the operative word, right? I mean, your calendar, your council calendar, and we're already booked out to BTS in May. Not jam-packed, but 6 months out. Again, so, I think Councilmember Ward, this is going to be an iterative process. It's going to, communities are going to be able to provide feedback. 90 days, our question was, how'd you come up with 90 days? Based on what? Based on it being a third, or based on, permit reviews, or what was it based on? And really was an arbitrary number that fit the definition of expedited. And these are also folks that don't necessarily work in local government. So understanding what the council calendars are, understanding that it takes 2 ordinances, it's not just a decision to be able to come out to the end. We'll learn as we go. Broomfield loves to be first on these things. But our guess is, Councilmember Ward, what this looks like in 2 years will be very different than what we're talking about right now, because of the feasibility and the standards. Back to Councilmember Hinkle's question about, one of our first questions was, what if you give us the money to do the project and we don't come within the, to Councilmember Cohen's point, what happens if you don't meet? Are you going to come, are you clawing the money back? Do you have a mechanism in order to make us repay those funds, which you think that they would, to go back into the pot, but they don't. So the kind of the quasi punishment was, well, you can't participate again for a year. So a lot of these decisions are being made on the fly, kind of that Q&A piece. So much more to come on what this looks like and the feasibility, the repeatable process, to Councilmember Hinkle's point. What is that methodology? What's the model look like? How is it distinguishable from, when you do put in, that was the information talking about what kind of land it is. that adds a completely different layer of complexity than they were even talking about before with the $1, $2, $3. So again, the more layers, the more complexity of the model, the more difficult it is going to be for any one of these outcomes.
Okay. Wonderful. That was my only question. My feedback is yes to both. And I'm more than happy to have council be the final decision maker instead of Flirk.
Thank you. Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. City manager was asking all the questions that I'm asking in my head as she's responding to Councilmember Ward. So my question is why?
Why would we do it?
Why is it laid out this way? Why is it being done this way? Why the fast track?
Well, that's a really long answer, and it depends on it depends on who you ask. I mean, again, I think the drive and the desire from the entire state of Colorado to be able to identify how do we get these units for these people that are very, underserved throughout the state. But it's complicated by it's expensive to live here. Rents are high, and you're not going to build your way out of this. It's just not going to happen. So folks come up with the legislature comes up with what they determine to be the most palatable short-term, long-term, not silver bullet. I don't think anybody thinks that Prop 123 is going to be, the end all be all, but it was a component. And part of the conversation when you're talking about the TODs and changing zoning, the only way to make it happen is to incentivize shorter term permit processes so you get the units quicker. So it's a much bigger conversation. And again, it depends on who you ask as far as the why.
Look, thank you. I understand that. Many of us have learned over our careers that this isn't always the best way to try to get something to happen. Fast tracking creates problems that require fixing and repairing and going back and mistakes being made and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to try to get a sense of what was in the legislators' heads when they passed this. Second question is, I'm assuming that this process will be initiated by staff. You'll be coming to us proposing that approval be granted to do something?
Yes, well, we would develop the ordinance, draft the ordinance, do our public engagement with stakeholders, technical workshops, Broomfield Voice. We would bring the draft ordinance back to you in a study session. And then from there, depending on that direction, maybe another study session, or maybe just come back straight for first reading of the ordinance and then second
So
reading.
each project
adoption.
would be a separate ordinance.
Oh, no, sorry. The process, the ordinance itself is, the process itself is an ordinance. Once the ordinance is adopted, we'll have code in place, and then it's the same process you follow today. So you see a site development plan, but instead of going to LERC, it would come presumably straight to you all for a vote, consideration and a vote.
Okay, and so would the projects be initiated by staff or by a developer or both?
I think by a developer, or Broomfield Housing Alliance would be a candidate. Yes.
Okay, so they would come to make the presentation
Yes.
to us.
Yeah.
Okay, in each case. Just to kind of give my view, is there two questions again?
Yes. Could we go to the slide with the questions right after the thank you slide?
Yeah, thank you. Just so everybody could see.
I think it's slide 13. Back one more, please. Oh, there. One more. Try 14. Okay, we're missing the slide. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, the slide is not there, but I can repeat the questions if you would like.
Please.
So the question is, would you like staff to proceed with pursuing this ordinance is question number one. And would you like council to be have the decision-making authority in lieu of, say, LURC?
Okay, so yes to both.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
And thank you. I don't have any questions, so I'll do this really quickly here. I say yes to establish a fast track process since it is the only way that we can access these Prop 123 funds. Although it feels like a little bit of a gamble trying to meet all these requirements. But we definitely need to go forward with the process and then understand there's not time for both LURC and council. This could lead to a lot of frustration if we as council do not sit up here and make these decisions based on past projects. So I think council definitely needs to be that final decision maker. However, it would be really nice if somewhere in that process, I know I value, I think we all value LURC's input, like to see what questions they're raising. So it would be nice if there was like some kind of recommendation that LURC would also at some point provide questions like at the beginning of the when the agenda first comes out, or someplace where LURC, we want their feedback. Is there a way to add that to the process?
No.
No, no requirement for feedback for us to consider. They could come to the
Not-
meeting.
Not meet the 90 days. I mean.
But they would be doing it in the background with us when the agenda comes out, like something to say, hey, LURC, we've got this agenda item coming up in 6 days. Can you please provide your feedback? Is there something so we see feedback from LURC? That's what I'm looking for. Not that they would have a meeting.
They could come
written.
for public comment.
Because I would want that. I would want to hear their input. And then
And Councilmember Anderson, and that's exactly why there's money attached to the 90 days. Because everybody has their processes that are in place that they are comfortable with, particularly because you have your boards and commissions, you have your folks that are, resident experts, you've asked them to do this. But in order to have an expedited process, the process itself is going to look different, vastly different, in order to make this work.
And then the neighborhood meeting is still there though, prior to the application coming in. That was a definite, because that is a piece we don't want to lose. And then the understanding that they understand this is going to be fast tracked and happen faster than a normal project, so that they are definitely here to provide their feedback is good. Okay, so yeah, I don't like the idea of doing this so fast. I see staff has a lot more glitches, and I appreciate Councilmember Henkel raising the concern about the timing over the holidays, because we can't really pull this off over Thanksgiving to Christmas break. If you had an application running over that period, we're out of luck unless we take that 30-day delay. So it's basically, I mean, they're kind of accidentally building this delay, where if you're going to submit in October, you might want to wait till January. So I guess that's a piece that we'll have to consider. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll offer my questions and comments now, since I don't see any of the council members raising their hand. So my first question is to go along with Councilmember Cohen's. It's, really what are we gaining versus what are we giving up? So it's not necessarily a question for staff to answer, but it's more of a question for our community to answer as well as our council to answer. It looks like that the baseline increase of affordable housing units is going to be about 3% per year. So looking at about 55 units or so per year increase. That will increase even more the next year after that first year of 55 units. So if we continue at the rate that we're building now, about 20% of those affordable units are for a year. I don't know if we can continue on that growth or not. And at only 20% of total units being 55, if it has to be more than that, we're going to have to build at a much greater speed per year, which I start to worry about that amount of residential growth year over year being built. out of this, there was a question that was asked about any, are we guaranteed any money if we add the expedited review process? It doesn't sound like there's any guaranteed money, that we may go through this process and there may not be any money. The word that they used was significant. $310 million for 2023 to 2024. This is not the first time that they've run out of money in terms of this kind of a grant process. So I do worry about the ability for this to actually be funded. I think about what are the trade-offs by creating an expedited review process. I think about the additional FTEs that could potentially be needed to create this faster turnaround. So I do wonder about the amount of money that we're actually going to spend internally to create this process and to go through this process in order just to get some revenue that may not actually offset those expenses that we're already spending internally. And then is our current, this is kind of the big question for me, is our current inclusionary housing ordinance solid policy and meeting goals and the metrics that we stated, that we laid out? So we already created an inclusionary housing ordinance and a process. Is that meeting its goals and metrics? And is that solid policy, or is that something that we actually should address first before we start down the road of layering on the Prop 123?
Well, staff certainly has an opinion on that, and the way you stated it, it would be best to understand how far we've come, where we've come, what the expectations are, and perhaps a good time to have that conversation, Mayor Pro Tem, is we're bringing the IGA with Broomfield Housing Authority. And kind of what that looks like, what the independence looks like, what the future funding from us, what that ask is. So perhaps combining where we were, where we are, what that outcome looks like, that would be a good, when is that? December. That's coming in December. So regardless of the council members that have said, yes and yes, draft the ordinance, work on the ordinance and bring it back. I think the December timeframe still gives us plenty of time to be able to have that understanding of past, present, and future, and how that fits into the Prop 123 dollars. Again, it's is the juice worth the squeeze?
Right. And I would put another question out there that what if we wait until after the November 1st, 2026 deadline? Is there any reason that we can't wait until after that point to go through the process to see how those conversations happen before then? So I don't know if there's any hurry that we need to jump on this. I definitely don't know if we need to be first in this conversation. I do wonder about what if we don't adhere to these rules? What if we just say to the state, we're not doing this? It doesn't sound like this is, like the newest iterations of state, overreach around transportation and transportation oriented development. So, this may be one of those where we don't have to adhere to it unless we want that money. So again, I don't know if there's any reason that we should do this. So, my feedback is, I have a lot of hesitation with us going down this road. I don't think that there's any necessity to hurry this conversation. I think that, so I don't believe that we need to do an ordinance at this point. I do think that if we do go through the process of having the ordinance, that council needs to be the last decision. The application and the approval of a development should not reside with LURC, and especially it should not reside with staff. So it should be council as the last decision maker on these developments. That's questions and comments I have. Councilmember Cohen.
I think Councilmember Lim should go first.
Yes. Well, I have two with 1 star, so.
I'll go quick. I just wanted to follow up with something from Attorney Rogers. If I understood you correctly, if the 90-day clock starts and we don't hit the 90 days, did you say it automatically is approved?
No, that is one of my concerns, that somebody will use the language in Prop 123 to say that and if our ordinance was passed to say you didn't follow your process, I'm going to ask for a judicial order to allow this project to move forward.
Okay. So otherwise, if we don't act, either that happens or it just ends, it's not approved, but we risk whatever
Funding.
funding is on the table. And the 30-day, I'm imagining that's our invention, the 30-day extension, or is that correct?
No, that is direct guidance from DOLA that we're eligible to ask for one or more 30-day extensions to address comments. We did not make up the 30 days. That comes directly
One or
from,
more,
yes, one or more.
unlimited more.
Yes.
I suppose you also could just withdraw it and restart the 90-day clock in a creative way we might.
The developer could, but staff can't. The developer could opt to pull out of the fast track process and just proceed along a traditional path.
Or the council could reject it and ask you to just reapply.
Mm.
Potentially. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lim.
It was my understanding from reading the memo that staff anticipated that they would not add FTEs to handle this, but that there was an indication that council should, it was kind of directed at council. Council should be ready to accept that all other development review work would halt during this 90-day window. Was that understanding correct?
Councilmember Lim, thank you for reading those things so thoroughly. So yes, it was by design to be able to say, while we don't plan on adding FTEs, if and when we are in that grind for the 90 days, I don't want to say that other developments are going to come to a halt. But certainly in order to meet that time frame, along with those other caveats, if you will, we would have to balance and prioritize those developments.
Okay. And then the memo seemed to indicate some possibility that the Vista Point development would be eligible for this hypothetically. So if we wait until we have that discussion in December with BHA, then what would be the process at that point of revisiting whether we need to move forward with this ordinance or not?
That's a really good question.
I mean, are we seeing this now because we need to make the decision now before we hear from BHA? That's my.
No, you're seeing this now because this is extremely complicated. And we feel we need all the lead time we can get. Vista Point is a candidate hypothetically. It's zoned for residential now. The Housing Authority owns it today. They could move forward with an application at any time. Obviously, we would need the fast track process to be in place as an ordinance to apply it, according to what we've laid out tonight. And that's probably a good year off or more, depending on how long it takes us to develop this complicated ordinance. So, it could be that the Housing Alliance wants to move forward sooner in a couple months and get through next year. And in that case, the fast track process would not be available yet. Of course, we work with developers all the time to try and meet their timelines if there's some significant other factor going on that we need to try and assist with. But for all intents and purposes, they would be following our traditional process.
And then they would not be eligible for, would
there's
they
not
be
a-
eligible for the Prop 123 funds if we don't have the ordinance and the process in place?
I think they're two different things. Yeah, the funds are totally different. They're not tied to the specific application. They're this hypothetical pot of funds out here that anybody, the city, a tribal government, a private developer, a quasi public developer could seek. But in order to seek those funds in our jurisdiction, we would need to have a fast track process in place by that deadline. The two aren't directly tied together, if that makes sense.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, then I'm okay waiting on the development of the ordinance. But if it goes forward, it should be council that decides it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, so after hearing a little further discussion here and looking back at the goals of the inclusionary housing ordinance, appreciate the understanding of the complexities too. I mean, this can still continue to move forward in the background, but I would be okay too, just waiting to see if this is, where are we at with our goals and do we really need to go through this process? I don't know, like if we need the process in place to go after the funding and we need the funding, then we need to move forward. But if we, I guess it's a different viewpoint to say, are we actually meeting our goals and are we doing okay without adding all these complexities? So I would be okay waiting until after the discussion in December to really move forward. Is that, do we have to make this decision now or can we wait and then finalize this decision in December to move forward with the process?
I know that for Ms. Merwin and her crew, this is as she had mentioned, a highly complicated ordinance. So in order to keep the momentum moving forward, seeking some direction tonight, because if council says, let's wait until after December, in our mind's eye, unless you say differently, our mind's eye means we're going to focus on other development and not on the development of this ordinance until we have the conversation with council, and then we get direction from council subsequent to the December going into 2025, and then we build that in the work plan for 2025.
Okay, I'll hear what others have to say, but I am open to either. So thank you.
Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So question I got from my colleague a little bit is this 90-day review period only for developments seeking Prop 123 funds, or is it for any affordable housing development? How does this work?
So the process is for any proposal that provides at least 50% of the units as affordable, defined as a 60% AMI for rental or 100% for sale. If they meet that, one of those criteria there, and the process is in place, then someone else, it's not directly tied to that applicant, but the funds are available to be pursued by others. So there isn't a direct connection between a specific application and the funds. It's that there's this process over here that needs to happen as an incentive to get funds somewhere else. And, you know, it could be that the funds could go to that project, but there isn't any guidance on that that's saying that there's a direct connection in any way.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. To answer the questions, yes, I am in favor of moving forward with this, and I am good with having council as the final decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I only have one question as well, and that relates to, I guess, the process with DOLA. Does DOLA have, I mean, maybe this is a general question as well. Does DOLA do fast track programs like this with other municipalities or counties, or is this just unique to Broomfield?
This is statewide.
Statewide, okay.
So there are governments all over the state, as Manager Hoffman mentioned, that are tracking this and trying to decide how to proceed. Some are small communities that already have, you know, can already meet these requirements. They get a couple permits a year. They only had so many homes to begin with. So their 3% increase every year is not a big ask. So some smaller communities are in great shape, but others, we need to really think long and hard about how to proceed and how to make it work. But it is statewide.
Thank you. To answer the two questions, I'm also for both question 1 and 2. And I just have to highlight that, you know, housing is something that's urgent. And I know that we do want to include and incorporate LURC as well, but I feel like that if this is a fast track review, we have to make sure that it goes, quickly. And of course, we'll include Lurk with public comment as well, and they can voice their thoughts as well. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to get through all my technology wires over here. Just to add on a little bit, I feel like there might be times where we might not have this type of housing because we don't have this type of funding. So there's always that thing where you talk about the chicken or the egg comes first. And we talk about that with transportation and housing. This could be the reason why we don't have this coming forward, because we don't have this state funding. I would hate to say no, and then we lose out on possible funding. I would rather move forward, even though it is complex and it seems like they're making up the rules as we go, to be engaged in that process, because you guys can go back and forth. I feel like if we are disengaged during this time that it's developing, then we won't see it the way that we want it as well with DOLA. So I would like to see us engaged. I would like to see, and we can have the ordinance there. It doesn't mean we always have to act upon it. It doesn't mean, it's just, at least it's something, much like we have our mortgage assistance. So if we have a program that's there, I would like to move forward with it, and be engaged in that process. And then it was a good question with Councilmember Anderson when she mentioned Lurk being involved. That doesn't necessarily mean a meeting with them, but it could mean that they just come up during public comment. A lot of times we see that anyway, where they either made their decision and they come back and give us their feedback, or they just give us their feedback that evening. And I would welcome that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have direction for this agenda item?
No, could we do just a straw poll? 'Cause we had two council members that weren't sure that they wanted to hear what everyone else had said. So that would be helpful.
All right. Well, I think that on the second question, whether or not this should go to council, I think that was pretty unanimous. That it should go to council. On the first one, should staff move ahead with the drafting of this ordinance? Can we get a straw poll to see who is in favor of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's your direction.
Thank you.
Yes, proceed with drafting an ordinance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for the presentation and discussion, staff. And thank you, council. Our next agenda item this evening is an update regarding the I-25 sub-area plan amendment process. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask staff to begin our discussion.
Thank you. And Brandon Rowe, our planning manager, is going to walk us through this item. Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. Again, Brandon Rowe, Planning Manager. I'm joined this evening by Will Wagenlander and Ryan Schatzman with RVI Landscape and Planning. They were our consultant for the first phase of this project. Could I get the next slide, please? The discussion this evening is to provide council with an overview of the draft findings for the phase 1 of the I-25 sub-area plan rewrite. This slide shows a map of the current I-25 sub-area plan. So this plan document was created to be a companion to the comprehensive plan. You can see that the plan area, or the northern gateway as the I-25 plan terms it, reaches from Anthem Ranch on the western side to County Road 11 on the far east, and generally from the northern Broomfield municipal boundaries on the north to about the promenade area to the south, just north of it. Could you get the next slide, please? Staff provided council with a pretty detailed and comprehensive memorandum as part of this evening's meeting. So I'm going to outline some key elements on the next few slides. Some key background is that the plan was created in September of 1999. It was drafted in collaboration with the town of Erie to help direct development in the Northern Gateway. At the time of creation, the area of Broomfield was predominantly agricultural or vacant land. Things have changed since then. The sub-area plan did recommend that the document be reviewed and updated as development occurred. However, outside of some land use map updates, as developments progressed, no significant updates occurred to the I-25 sub-area plan since its adoption. Next slide, please. So council may be asking why and why now? So as I mentioned, conditions in the Northern Gateway have changed significantly since the original adoption in 1999. A large portion of the project area, so most of the western portion of the current I-25 sub-area plan has been largely built out. This includes developments like Anthem Ranch and Anthem Highlands, the Highlands themselves, large portions of Palisade Park, and the western portion of North Park, which we've all seen develop over the years. There have been population and demographic shifts, as well as changes in the economic markets and the development patterns along the Front Range, but particularly in the northern portions of Broomfield, which have all contributed to a major update or rewrite of the plan being required at this time or recommended. That's due to the development pressures, but also a big element that was discussed throughout phase one is the unprecedented increases in infrastructure costs that we're seeing. That means that a lot of the infrastructure and service capacity that we have on top of water and sanitary services are driving elements for revisiting what development in the northern portion of Broomfield should or could look like. And the plan being created in 1999 doesn't necessarily align with what development expectations are in 2024 and beyond. So the approach to the project is that we broke it into two phases. We would need consulting teams for each phase. As I mentioned, RVI was our consultant for phase one, which was a scoping of best practices and innovations that carried out the predominant portion of this year, starting in about February and running through. We anticipate wrapping up before the end of the year. And then phase two would be a future phase that we envision starting in 2025. That would be the formal rewriting of the I-25 plan. So that would include all the technical work, the engagement, and then drafting and finalizing the new document. And we anticipate that being an approximately 18-month process. Next slide, please. I'm going to dive into some of the key takeaways from the phase one report. So as I mentioned, the consultant did a number of outreach, which included staff interviews and case study analysis. The number one key takeaway that we took from that is that there was consensus out of the staff interviews that the future rewriting of the I-25 sub-area plan needed to fundamentally be based on the foundation of fiscal responsibility and intentionality in shaping future development in what remains as Broomfield's last greenfield area in the north. So the phase one report goes into some additional detail of that, which was attached to the staff memorandum. But on top of that, there were some key elements or categories of what the plan should look like or incorporate moving forward. That's community engagement and incorporation of DEI principles. That's reviewing what the utility capacity is and planning for infrastructure for the future. As I mentioned, a more realistic and balanced land use planning approach. And then the last two major elements were the I-25 sub-area plan that we have in place now hasn't been updated. So the new plan should incorporate a capacity for adjustment to market conditions as they evolve in the future and allow for actionable implementation and monitoring as we progress. Next slide, please. Second key takeaway that came out of the first finding, or the findings for the first phase of the project, is that the actual plan boundaries should be revisited. So as I mentioned, a large portion of the western portion of the sub-area plan has been built out. You see on this map, two colors, a light blue and a pinkish purple. So combined, the pink and purple and the blue area encompasses what is today the I-25 sub-area plan. The blue area is the western portion that's largely built out, that the recommendation is to remove from the plan moving forward. So the rewrite in the future would focus largely on the pink area. So that is predominantly east of the interstate. We have the eastern portion of North Park, and the line generally follows the Huron Street configuration. So Huron Street East. Next slide, please. There are a number of other key takeaways. Briefly, I've mentioned infrastructure a few times, but we really want to reiterate that future costs of infrastructure and reassessing what is actually needed to serve the area is going to be a major element as the plan moves forward. The balancing of land uses to ensure alignment with service capacity. A key takeaway was that engagement is vital on all levels. So not only with the residents adjacent to the area, but also with surrounding communities to ensure that there's collaboration and we avoid unnecessary or excessive infrastructure investment. And then finally, the creation of the capacity and monitoring, which could include creating or implementing a digital dashboard in the future. That's an element that would be looked at in greater detail with phase 2 as we progress. Next slide, please. So some key focus areas: fiscal responsibility and prioritizing infrastructure and planning. The plan organization is proposed to follow a precedent-based approach with some digital optimization. So the precedent-based approach allows for chapters of land use, transportation, open space, those sorts of things. The digital optimization makes it more 2024, where we can integrate it onto a web platform. It improves digital accessibility, which aligns with the state's requirements that we've implemented. And then integrating an opinion of probable costs, which would outline infrastructure estimates directly into the document as opposed to a standalone document as we see today. As I mentioned, the time frame, phase 1 will wrap up in December. We anticipate phase 2 to begin in early to mid 2025. And once we have a consultant under contract, that would be a 12 to 18-month process we expect. Because of the anticipated budget, that would be a competitive bid. So we would go through an RFP process for that. Next slide, please. Some initial deliverables were listed in the staff memorandum for you. Those include a market study, a comprehensive traffic impact study, analysis, infrastructure and utility capacity analyses, public engagement, a couple drafts of the sub-area plan document, and then the final draft that would be considered for approval. Next slide, please. And then the next 2 slides, we'll talk about engagement, both externally and internally. So the approach that staff is recommending is utilizing the Broomfield Voice platform and using a full inventory of the tools that exist on that. So that includes question and answer, feedback back and forth, maps that you can interact with and put points on, all things that the residents of Broomfield are pretty familiar with through other projects that we've done. We would hold stakeholder meetings and have presentations both in person and virtual. Utilization of our existing communication channels and strategies that includes some of our partner agencies that we work closely with. Using on-site signs and mailers prior to engagement meetings. We would use some passive slides in the digital televisions that are in most of our facilities to share information, particularly about stakeholder meetings. We could include information on water bills or inserts with water bills to really drive up engagement with the plan to have the community invested in it. And then we would have the 2 primary engagement points. The first event would be within the first third of the project timeline. That would give the consultant some time to finish some of the initial analysis so the community has something to hear about and to engage with. And then the second event would be after the initial draft was written and prior to City Council's consideration of that plan for adoption. Next slide, please. The next element is that internal engagement in the role of City Council. So staff is proposing that Council's role begin tonight with this study session. And the direction and feedback that you provide during this discussion this evening will be incorporated into the phase 1 document as the conclusion to the report. And then will help us to formalize the RFP for phase 2 moving forward later this fall. Council will also have the opportunity to review and approve the proposed contract for phase 2 of the project. As I mentioned, because of the proposed budget, it would need council approval once we have a contract ready to move forward. And then the approach for phase 2, at this time, we're proposing that we hold 2 study sessions with City Council. The exact schedule for that has not been formalized. And then monthly updates through the CMO's weekly update to City Council communication that exists currently. And then City Council would hold a public hearing to review and adopt the final plan prior to it becoming effective. Next slide, please. So going to wrap up. Next steps is the finalization of this phase 1 report, phase 2 RFP and bidding, approval of that contract, and then diving into the 12 to 18-month process for phase two. And next slide, please. As part of the staff memorandum, we included a series of 3 questions to help guide tonight's discussion. Those include asking council if they support changing the boundaries of the I-25 sub-area plan. The scope of the project is proposed to reduce to the new area, which was that pink section on the map that I showed. Does council agree with the intended method of engagement for you all moving into phase two? We welcome feedback and direction. And then the final question was, does council agree with the method for public and stakeholder engagement that was just outlined for phase two? Again, we welcome your feedback and direction. The questions 2 and 3 had some details in them. Those are on future slides. So if we need to pull those up for more detailed discussion for those, happy to do that as well. But that concludes staff's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Does any member of council have any questions or comments? We have a number 2, so Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you. That was really weird. I think I pushed it twice, so I apparently have twice the time. Just kidding. Thank you for the presentation. And I know this is mainly obviously in Ward 5 in that area. So I like the idea in answering this with the new sub area plans. I would like to look at the map again and just sort of reiterate in that area, this is sort of our last frontier in Broomfield really to be developed and what that looks like. We've heard some crazy plans in that area before as well from the private owners, you know, coming forward with these very futuristic ideas. It almost seemed like it was a Disney World there at some point. And then they just went away and I don't know what happened to them. I mean, they were talking about certain things that I really can't talk about, but I will say that it almost seems like we're not sure like what's feasible in other areas in Broomfield. So like right now we're seeing certain things are feasible, certain things aren't. And I do like just the general idea of working with and having engagement. If you will look, if council, I'm sure you guys can see it, on the pink sides, there's Erie to the west. We have also Weld County in there as well. And also I'm assuming that's Thornton to the east, right? And on both all the way up, is that correct? Okay. I would like to include just some sort of feedback if we can from those boundaries and do some sort of outreach because we do have to be good neighbors. And I know Weld County doesn't always play nicely with us as far as driving and roads. And we actually have a road that ends in Weld County because they do not want to work with us in our neighborhoods. They want that. So we want to be good neighbors too. And I don't want to be caught flat-footed with them saying, hey, you guys have this development going forward. We didn't know about it. And so I would like to include them and have plans to include sort of our bordering areas there. But yeah, I agree with the rest of it. That's sort of my initial feedback right now. And then I'll add more feedback later, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to respond quickly about the neighboring, because that was in there, was it not?
Councilmember, thank you. Yeah, so in the staff memo, there's a section where we outline all of the surrounding municipalities as well as some regional and state agencies we'll work with. But specifically for our surrounding communities, the engagement really is going to focus on folks adjacent to the property, which would include surrounding communities. So we'll be sure to hear the voices of everyone that would be impacted by the decisions made by the plan.
Okay, and those were good points about the infrastructure. And okay, so I only have one question. The answers to the questions 2 and 3 are yes. I think if that doesn't include enough outreach, that's a lot of outreach. I mean, that's a lot of opportunities to provide input. I guess I would just be clear on everybody might not know what an I-25 sub area plan is. So maybe the reason why they should care might be good in that outreach. But the only question I have is related to the portion of baseline west of the Huron Street realignment. And since some of that, like the UC Health campus has not ever, that hasn't come forward yet. There's the area kind of in the middle there, it hasn't been developed. Is there a reason why we're not going a little further west to incorporate the parts of baseline that are not solidified?
Thank you, Councilmember. So partially staff has been in ongoing discussions with McWinney on what those developments may look like. Generally, we have an idea of what it's going to look like. There are also established PUD requirements that will help guide what that looks like. So the I-25 plan wouldn't override the North Park PUD there. So that's why those sections were largely excluded, despite them being vacant at this time.
It's also partially because infrastructure is more developed, the plan there. Okay, so
Correct.
staff was confident that this is, I'm good with this plan, to use these boundaries then? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lim.
So I was curious in the process, is the consultant who did the scope in phase one likely to be an applicant for the RFP in phase two?
Councilmember, I will speak for them at this point. I anticipate that they would likely consider applying, but it would be a competitive process, so we would have to consider every applicant that applied.
All right, I mean, they did some of the background already.
They did, yep.
Okay. When they had, I don't know what page this is on, maybe page 45. I don't know, that's my last reference in here, my notes on the draft study. There's a section that talks about roles and responsibilities, and it says, identify typical roles and responsibilities for developer contributions related to the direct impacts of their developments. I was stuck on the word typical. Can we get somebody to think out of the box here? I mean, I think we've heard from our residents that there's questions that were raised with the water rates. Is new development paying for itself? We hear internally questions from staff. Is development paying for itself? We hear questions about metro districts. Are residents shouldering the burden of the infrastructure more than the developer? So that word typical struck me as, hey, maybe we don't want typical development up there. Maybe we want somebody to think out of the box. And will we get that kind of reply from that phase two consultant?
That's a big question. So I'll start with the typical elements that all developments are responsible for, and that's installing infrastructure, water sewer lines to serve their communities. So that's part of the discussion of identifying what that sort of litany of just check the box items that a developer has to do when they come to Broomfield to develop. But I do agree that and believe that as part of phase two, we are looking for outside the box solutions. So while it hasn't necessarily been identified specifically in the phase one draft report of thinking outside the box, the intent going into the RFP for phase two is to find a consultant who is willing to sort of think uniquely and find solutions that may not be typical.
Okay. And then I had a specific thought about the funding of the infrastructure related to oil and gas. So there's a lot of legacy stuff up there in that east of I-25 that's low producing. And so hopefully somebody's going to look at that and say, we've got mechanisms, possibly with ECMC now, to have the operator do what they should be doing and P&A that stuff, instead of even, I want to take that off the developer even, where I want to kind of put the infrastructure mainly onto the developer. I want to say the operator should be P&Aing those wells and not the developer there.
I'll be honest, I'm not overly familiar with the oil and gas processes, just because that wasn't something I worked on heavily. But we will definitely add that to the list of items to identify for phase two as we move forward. and look at those options of who's responsible for the oil and gas elements. But we have identified oil plugged in, abandoned, or operating, although minimally, oil and gas wells as a major element to look at as we look at phase 2.
Okay, thanks. There's a comment about consider rezoning private property to better align with the new I-25 sub-area plan and possibly revoke or amend existing PUD plans. I don't remember that we've ever done that.
I can jump in first for a solution. And Ms. Burton-Zetti shaking her head no, but we have not. Although almost every, if not every, approved document in the recent history has the option for city council to revoke approvals after a period of time, typically 3 years for a site development plan and 5 years for a plan unit development if no development has occurred. We just have, the city council hasn't exercised that tool in their tool bag.
Okay. Okay, I think those are my questions. Thank you. And yes to the questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I got a curiosity question, which is how much in that new reduced area, how much of that land is still available to be developed? Because a very unscientific cursory glance at your map and at Google Maps kind of implies that there's quite a bit that we can do when it comes to infill and making use of that land.
I actually just closed the tab that had
Oh,
it,
no.
but it's approximately 3,000 acres, give or take.
Yeah, that's a lot. And is that currently zoned as anything? Is that's just PUD?
So there's a little bit of a mixed bag of zoning out there, but the predominantly larger lots east of the interstate are PUD. And most of the vacant lots along I-25 on the western side also have PUDs approved.
Great. Okay, that's really interesting. So I did want to jump in partially because my opinions aren't really any different from my colleagues, but I want to vehemently support the first one. Infill development, making use of the infrastructure we have is not only fiscally prudent, but it helps us avoid this potential sprawl we could end up having. So I want to really just thank you all for bringing this forward because it is smart, it is prudent. I think it is a great plan and it's a great way to develop. So not just a yes, but I just want to express a vehement yes. And then the other two yes as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I have a question about the market study that staff's going to undertake. And I guess before I ask that question, you just said most of that area has PUDs. Is there anything specific in those PUDs that says it's going to be a certain type of development?
Thank you, council member. So most of the PUDs outlined in pretty detailed details for that time what was to develop east of the interstate. I can say that a large amount of that land was envisioned to be commercial because in 1999 shopping malls were all the rage. So I think there was a lot of vision that up there would be another large shopping area or regional shopping center. That goes back to the fact that was reiterated multiple times that conditions have changed.
Yeah, I definitely saw that in the, I had it in the opinion of probable costs document from 1999. There were a few particular 3 letters that I didn't quite understood what they were on the east side of I-25. I think MUC was one of the designations, and I have no idea what that stands for. And so the reason I ask that, though, is when you go and do this market rate analysis, are we doing multiple types of analysis and saying, does the market currently, we know it doesn't support the current proposals as it stands right now, otherwise we really wouldn't be doing this. But are we putting inputs in for the market rate study to say, well, we want this type of development up here, or are we just saying, have fun and bring it back, whatever you'd like?
Council member, first MUC, I'll help you with that one. That's mixed use commercial typically.
Okay.
And a point of clarification, staff, Broomfield staff themselves won't be carrying out the market study. That would be a responsibility of our consultant. And that's sort of where we would look to them as the subject matter experts. We would expect their team to have someone who has the expertise in market studies to tell us the best practices. I envision that we would want to see multiple scenarios because that's thinking outside the box, as Council Member Lim had alluded to, of we have to have the capacity for change and the market dynamics change.
Okay, well, then let me ask you this. Are we specifying like it needs to have a certain amount of density? It needs to have a certain amount of the proportion of residential to commercial, or are there any inputs that staff is giving to the third party? So that way we at least have some idea of what we're trying to get out of it.
The short answer is yes. So we haven't gotten into those detailed discussions yet. That's going to include discussions with finance, with Mr. Romine in the economist element. And those discussions would happen likely prior to us bringing on the consultant, so that we would have those parameters that they could feed into their models to help get initial information to kick the project off. So I envision and anticipate we will give them some baseline information of what we understand that we need as a community to be successful.
Mr. Rowe, could you also talk a little bit about how the feedback from our transportation staff, open space staff has already shaped some of the information in phase one that will be used moving into phase two?
Absolutely. So we had a core team. It was discussed sort of in the memo, but folks from Open Space and Trails have already met with our phase one consultant and have identified investments that have been made historically and how that'll shape sort of the expectations of the area, along with the recently updated Open Space and Trails plan. And then transportation and traffic staff have met with our phase one consultant, and that helped feed into the first report, as they're always actively involved in regional coordination. So we have identified that there will be coordination with particularly the town of Erie for transportation network. They've identified that there are some segments of infrastructure that were identified in 1999 that may no longer be necessary or appropriate. And that's where we've gotten to this point.
Okay, yeah, I did see in the memo that open space, trails, transportation had been kind of more front with the initial discussions with phase one. But as it relates to what those inputs are that staff's going to provide before a contractor is selected, is that going to be a separate study session for council, or is that just staff has identified stuff and that's what you're gonna go with?
Mr. Rowe, I'm going to jump just on for the east side of I-25. It's two property owners. It's ag right now, but there's no infrastructure. So the closest, or the soonest, I should say, that we would even be anticipating development is more than a decade away. Just as an FYI.
Okay.
So to Councilmember Delgadillo's point about infill and density, the focus, at least over the next 3 to 8 years, is going to be on that west side. In that sub area plan, the cost for a developer to do anything east of I-25 is going to be enormous.
Yes, I think the reason I'm asking these questions is I feel like sometimes we as just a society go, ooh, open land, let me put something there. I don't care what it is, we're just gonna put something there because we have it. And I personally don't think all of that should go to development. I think a large portion of it should stay as just like open space and not do anything with it. So I was just curious what those inputs were to help guide that conversation of the market study. Other than that, I do support all of them. The number, the 3 steps. I support changing the boundaries. I support the intended method for council engagement, and I support the intended method of public and stakeholder engagement.
Thank you. Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you so much for the presentation, Mr. Rowe. I only had just one quick question, and that's what if we don't do anything and we just keep the boundaries or the 1999?
Thank you, council member. So generally, we are seeing a lot of development proposals that don't align with the current I-25 develop or sub-area plan. And that's because the market does like to meet current expectations. That sort of ties back into what Councilmember Delgadillo and Councilmember Ward were alluding to is we would risk getting development that is not consistent with the vision of the community, and we wouldn't have the mechanism to say no or to shape it in a more appropriate manner. So an example is the I-25 plan now does not really emphasize transit-oriented communities, walkable communities, those sorts of things. A new plan that has more teeth, for a lack of better terms, in regulatory framework would help us to ensure that development occurs as we see fit.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. With those, that wonderful explanation, then, my response for staff direction is going to be yes on all proposed questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation, appreciate the strategy here, and I support all 3.
Thank you. Any other council member questions or comments on this agenda item? All right, with that, thank you, staff. I think there's clear direction. Perfect. With that, thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the presentation. It being just after 8 o'clock, we will take our 8 o'clock break. We'll be back here at 8, let's just say 8:20. 13 All right, welcome back. Thank you, council colleagues, for your the break. Our final agenda item this evening is a continued conversation from the July 2nd study session with staff seeking direction on staff efforts for the 2025 legislative session, including support of council membership organizations. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask staff to begin our discussion.
Thank you very much. And Danae Brouillard is going to walk us through this item, the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Governmental Affairs. And I just have to tell council how much staff's appreciate. We have not brought we haven't brought a plan the size of the I-25 sub area plan for over a decade. And so there wasn't really a blueprint about how to do it or what it looked like or what the feedback or the stakeholder engagement piece. So everybody is very appreciative of your thoughtful comments and your questions and the big thumbs up to move forward. It means a lot to us. So thank you. Ms. Brouillard.
I'm going to go through some quick slides here, and then we'll talk about direction that we're looking for from council this evening on the 2025 legislative session. Next slide, please. So we'll have three parts. The first part will be the recap of the July 2nd study session, including the investments and outcomes made in those during that time. Then we'll move to the second part, which is the factors that influence Broomfield's level of impact in the legislative space. And then finally, we'll go into the direction needed for the 2025 session from council this evening. The first one is a shared definition or understanding of direct impact to CCOB as an entity. And then from there, the desired resources, time and money that follow. We'll talk about the council membership organizations and the structure and level of staff support. And then finally, we'll end with communication to council. So council meeting updates, virtual updates, and the email communications that we do regarding legislation. Next slide. All right, so recap of the 2024 legislative session. Overall, we spent about 71 hours per week of senior staff time working on legislation. As a reminder, the session runs from January to about May. It picks up obviously towards the end of the session when all of the bills really start dropping. But this was a conservative estimate of how much staff time is spent on these efforts. In addition to that staff effort, we also have council's membership organizations. Council's involved in 6 organizations that are very active in the legislative space. So as you all know, there are many more membership organizations that you all serve in than 6, but we focused on the ones that are active and primarily focus on legislative efforts. And I'll dive into those 6 later in the presentation. In addition to the council membership organizations, staff also participate in various professional membership organizations. And this is just really important to note. One, because we hold several leadership roles in those organizations. And then a lot of the positions that are typically elected. So your treasurer, assessor, county clerk, and the sheriff are part of our leadership staff, which is nice. They serve at the direction of Manager Hoffman and are agile and nimble in responding to legislation because they're in that staff level position. For estimated fiscal impact, this was conservative, but we estimated about $265,000 invested in the 2024 session. And that was based on $135,000 for staffing and our contract lobbyists, Aponte Busam, which I'll speak about in a little bit, and then $130,000 for the council membership organizations. Next slide. And then to talk about influence, and I want to say when we did this update on July 2nd, there was great feedback from staff about how hard it is to quantify impact. And it is really hard to speak of it in absolute terms. So what we tried to do is just use the data that we could quantify. So we recognize it doesn't necessarily capture networking opportunities, education, or some of the efforts that council members did through their membership organizations. But we did our best to quantify it based on the data that we did have. Based on that, council took position on 25 bills. And again, hard to determine all of the impact, but what we do know when we look at our data is that the return on investment was very limited in regards to desired outcomes for Broomfield. Next slide. So to give a visual to that impact, you can see here the 25 bills that council took positions on. On the left side, it has the 4 bills that required action by the city and county of Broomfield. And then on the right side, it has bills that we took positions on, but didn't have minimal, or that had minimal or no impact on Broomfield as an entity. Next slide. All right, so now part 2, which was to talk about the factors that influence Broomfield's presence in the legislative space. So on average, less than 10% of the bills that are introduced each session have little to no impact on Broomfield. I said that backwards. 10% have impact on Broomfield, 90% do not. And why is that? It's important to note that we have some unique status that creates that divide on what impacts us and what does not. The first is that we're a home rule authority. We also have the combined city and county authority. As I just mentioned, positions that are typically county elected positions, such as the treasurer, sheriff, clerk, recorder, and assessor, are full-time leadership staff. Broomfield is debruced. And then the majority of the bills that are introduced each year apply to state agencies. So I know, for example, this past year, we talked about how many bills were sent to DOLA, right? Studies or toolkits that DOLA had to prepare. So those don't have direct impact on Broomfield. Next slide. In addition to that, there's a lot of state level complexity and competition that we wanted to highlight. So it is really hard for us to influence those state policy efforts, as there are a lot of larger players in the arena, which I'll speak to in a moment on some of the examples. And then also several of the membership organizations that you all are a part of or that staff are a part of are already representing some of those voice and concerns to the decision makers. Additionally, we have a wide variety of policy priorities. So as you know, our policy document is very broad, intentionally broad, they typically are, but it makes it very hard to have a laser focused agenda, which means efforts commonly get diluted as we're down at the Capitol and having those conversations. Next slide. All right, so on July 2nd, staff asked us to bring forward an opportunity to discuss your council membership organization. So that's 6 that I just talked about, and what you would like staff structure and support to look like. There was a request for us to come back with an understanding of what direct impact on Broomfield means. It was clear after the July 2nd meeting that it is hard to delineate what directly impacts us and what does not. And so we will have a proposal for your consideration tonight. And then just to mention that if we do want to continue at the same level that we did in 2024, we will need to increase staff efforts moving forward to be able to keep or maintain the pace at which we operated this past session. Next slide. All right, so now we're to the direction needed for the 2025 session this evening. So the first question was to bring forward a shared definition or understanding of impact on CCOB. So what we've done is kind of delineated it into 2 categories. So the first one are the bills that directly impact the city and county of Broomfield as an entity. As I mentioned earlier, that's less than 10% of the bills introduced on average per legislative session. If council agrees with this definition, then what would happen is staff would flag those bills and bring forward a recommended position and ask council to take a formal position on those bills. It would be about 3 to 5 bills per legislative session. Again, knowing that from that status that we have, the funnel automatically gets much smaller, and then looking at which ones actually have significant impact on Broomfield. An example of this to kind of help give a visual to that is Senate Bill 213 land use, which was introduced in 2023. If you all recall, it was the first version of the transit and oriented community bill. And what happened was it took away public process. We lost the ability to make some local land use decisions. It preempted local decision making. And there were significant concerns identified by staff and by council. At that time, council decided to take a formal opposed position. And what that means based on your council rules and procedures is that we activated all resources. So we did a social media campaign. It went out in the Be in the Loop and the Monday community updates. We did social media posts. We reached out to all of our senators and representatives to share Broomfield's position. And we even activated, I think, Councilmember Hinkle and Lim and Mayor Castriota all spoke on different panels in opposition of that effort. So that's a great example of a bill that had significant impact on Broomfield as an entity, where council took a position and then we were able to activate our resources to have an impact. The second category are the bills that do not directly impact CCOB as an entity. And this was some feedback that we got from council members at the July 2nd meeting is this is challenging. And this is where I think it gets a little bit gray is it doesn't mean that these bills aren't important. I think Councilmember Hinkle, you gave an example of it may still be important to our constituents. It may be important to your business, the businesses in Broomfield, and we recognize that. And so we wanted to call that out and say, okay, we understand that those are important, but they don't impact us as an entity. So they are the 90% that fall into this other bucket. And if they fall into that other bucket, then what would happen in that case is individual council members could support it. So you could still testify, you could still speak on behalf. You would just have to say that you're speaking as on behalf of as an individual. One question that's come up is, can you say that I'm a council member when you do that? And you can very much do that. You just cannot speak on behalf of the body or on behalf of Broomfield. A good example of one of these that we took a position on in 2024 would be the cause required for eviction. So if you remember, it established some different requirements in the bill that had to be met before you could evict a tenant. And it was important. It aligned with council's affordable housing and equity values. However, it didn't impact Broomfield as an entity. It may benefit some of our residents. So that was one that may be important, but wouldn't fit in that first bucket, but maybe an opportunity to go in that does not directly impact Broomfield, and individual council members could advocate in support or opposition of that bill. Next slide. All right, the second part where we need direction tonight is related to membership organizations. So before I dive into them, I just wanted to give a visual of the professional associations and the membership organizations that we're a part of. So again, some of these are council, some of these are staff, but you can see just kind of the overlap that we have related to efforts in the legislative space. Next slide. All right, so now looking at involvement and staff support for those membership organizations. As a reminder, when we look at the bills that were introduced and considered by the membership organizations, again, about 90% of those bills do not impact CCOB directly, or the impact is very limited and manageable. So staff will continue to participate in the professional organizations that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. But we seek direction on what support is needed. And so what I'll do quickly is go through the 6 membership organizations that I mentioned earlier and what we provided in regards to staff support in 2024, the dues and kind of what that looked like. Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf, during the last meeting, there was a desire to know about return of investment. And so we've captured what we can speak to from the staff perspective, and then we'll look for direction from council on the desired support moving forward. So the first one is Colorado Counties Acting Together, or CCAT. Staff support in 2024 was minimal. We attended meetings, but it was only based on the agenda. So for example, when the property tax bills were introduced towards the end, we were heavily involved in those meetings, but otherwise staff did not participate. The 2024 annual dues are about $22,000. The next one is Colorado Counties Incorporated, or CCI. In 2024, the staff support was significant. What that looked like was attending 3 full-day meetings every month throughout the session. We also reviewed all of the steering committee agendas and provided the summaries and level of impact to Broomfield. The benefit of doing that was we were able to analyze some real data of how many bills we reviewed and how many impacted Broomfield. And it was about 10 and 100 bills did have that direct impact, going back to the definition that I just shared. The annual dues for CCI are $26,150. Next slide. Next is the Colorado Municipal League, or CML. Staff support in 2024 for CML was minimal. We attended 1-hour legislative update meetings and provided feedback or data when requested. So for example, CML sometimes would send out surveys asking how we handled some land use decision, and staff would provide that feedback. 2024 dues were $46,000, and they include the staff memberships as well. Colorado Communities for Climate Action, or CC4CA, required a medium level of staff support in 2024. And that was because we attend monthly legislative meetings and complete surveys similar to what we did for CML. But the additional work for CC4CA was just drafting and reviewing talking points for various testimony that was provided by council members throughout the session. The dues for CC4CA are $10,300. Next slide. And we have the Metro Mayor's Caucus, or MMC. Staff support was minimal in 2024. We attended the monthly legislative update meetings based on the agendas here, and the annual dues are $8,115. And then finally, I think this is the last one, we have the Metro Area County Commissioners, or MAC. And the staff support here was medium, anticipated that will move to minimal as council member Hinkle shifts to, there's a fancy title for it now. Chair Emeritus. Yeah, okay, there's a good term that they've adjusted, she's shifting into. So with that shifting, yeah, we anticipate that that's going to decline. But what it did look like for 2024 was just monthly agenda setting meetings, and then the membership meetings once a month, and then providing talking points and background information for council members when requested. And MAC does not have an annual membership fee. Next slide. I lied, there's one more. So the last one is the Northwest Mayors and Commissions Coalition, NWMCC. This one does have medium support. Staff attends these meetings monthly. I did want to note that it's just a little bit different from the other organizations that I talked about, because they do a lot of work beyond state policy. For example, they do a lot of federal efforts around the transportation space. So it does look different than what we see of the other 5 membership organizations. And the dues for that is around $13,000. Next slide. All right, and then the last decision point that we need from council and direction tonight is communication to council regarding legislation. And this really will stem from, if we get to a shared definition of what impact to Broomfield is, what then subsequent communication should look like. In 2024, we provided written communication, updates at council meetings. We had the virtual updates with Aponte Busam every 3 weeks. And then we also do a legislative preview breakfast and a legislative dinner with our state representatives. And we're just seeking direction on what the desire is from council moving into 2025. As I mentioned before, that was a large chunk of staff time on these efforts. Next slide. All right, so in closing, again, with about less than 10% of the bills impacting CCOB directly, we're looking for direction from council on 3 items tonight. First, do you guys want to proceed with the recommendation of the shared definition and understanding of what impact to Broomfield means? So direct impact to Broomfield versus important but not directly impacting Broomfield. And then subsequent to that, next slide, we're looking for direction on desired structure and staff support for membership organizations, and then what communication looks like moving forward. I guess most important to note that depending on the direction tonight, additional staffing and resources may be needed. And that concludes the staff report.
Thank you for that report. Does any member of council have any questions or comments? Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you for the presentation and the sort of recircling of the ideas. I would like to see, I know that Councilmember Marshall and I think a couple others wanted to have some sort of legislative group that is really involved, in these groups. So the CC4CA rep, maybe someone from CCI, and then MAC, and the Metro Mayor's Caucus, maybe, that is its group in and of itself. So I would like to see some sort of gelling of something like that. So you can move quicker through some of these bills if we need to, if people want to be engaged in that way. There's some people who work probably, 2 to 3 jobs and they can't be involved in that, and that's fine too. It doesn't mean that we, well, I'll let council decide, but I think a lot of times we do have to move quickly on some legislation. So that just is sort of a thought there. The one thing I think that we're missing on here. I will speak to the 2 entities that I'm a part of, CCI and then MAC. And I know there's other members of CCI as well. So just to give everyone sort of a clear idea, a lot of times I'm on the CCI call, and then James is on there mainly for tax and finance. But he also can be on the call as well if he wants to, same with Councilmember Ward. And then Councilmember Ward is on there generally for transportation and or any other issues where he feels, he has, some sort of input. There is only one vote in that case. We did have a lot of staff initially in that group and have, staff there at the all-day sessions in January. And I think it was just because it was a new group. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what was going to go on. And then one day, even, Commissioner Sonnenberg completely smashed one of our supports for what I felt was a good need in Broomfield for transportation. And so I felt a little, demolished in that sense. And it was something that was funding that didn't even affect his county. That was the weirdest thing. And I'm not saying that just because CCI either, monitors it or doesn't support it or does support it, doesn't mean if it brings it over that finishing line. I'm not saying that, but I will say that we need to be in there as partners with other regions too, because a lot of times we might need other regional partners in CCI to back us up, just like we would with them in their regional issues. I will say at the January meeting, I did go back to those bills. Actually, about 50% of those bills were either they have minimal impact, but there's still some impact, or there was notes in there saying we'll go back to staff and see what sort of impact, and that's fine too. A lot of times in preliminary, you're not making any decisions. So I do want to give pushback. I don't believe it actually is 10%. I would like to see the numbers a little bit more clearly in that regard because I felt like there were some that we had to pull out. But I would like staff support in that sense. It doesn't mean that we have to have staff support there anymore necessarily all day, but that spreadsheet really helped a lot. So that first meeting, I just needed some assistance, and I would imagine other council members did too. So for that one for CCI, I still would like to see us engaged, but we don't necessarily need the staff there 24/7 like we did this year because it was a new entity. And then the second part was MAC. That is, for people who don't know, it's more of a co-op. And so I developed the slides for that. I developed the questionnaire for that. I reached out to people, made sure that they were attending the meetings. I did a lot of that on my own. And so that was just the chair position though. And the emeritus chair now is going to be responsible for relationship building. So I'm going to be doing that all on my own again. That'll be with Heidi Williams. We're looking to partner with the Metro Mayor's Caucus and just seeing what we can do to partner with them and or other partners as well. I will say there is a gap that I'm seeing. If we do have meetings that really elevate housing, for instance, so MAC elevates housing a lot. If we could have someone there that maybe just specializes in housing, we don't necessarily need to have the same staff member at all times at all these meetings. I would much rather have more of a specialist in those meetings, and then they can communicate. For instance, Denver is receiving federal funding right now, and Boulder was just notified, like for the homeless, population, and they wanted to be a part of that, just like they do in Phoenix. There's a Metro Phoenix area where they are able to do that. So I would like to just sort of evaluate if we do have a staff member there, it doesn't have to be that same staff member that goes across the legislative areas. It could be more of a specialist in that one area because it's not necessarily legislatively that we're talking about. So even though MAC might be under that legislative area, we don't actually always talk about legislative bills.
Thank you, Councilmember Henkel. Your time is up.
Could I
So
have one more sentence, please?
one more sentence.
And then I'll be done. So I would like to just put it out there that the thought in my brain is that if instead of going with Aponte and Bussam, maybe we add another staff member to help us support in that regard. We don't necessarily need an entire lobbying crew. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. In answering these questions, Ms. Brouillard, I'm going to jump around a little bit, so bear with me. I'm going to start with number 4. I don't think we necessarily need to have a lobbying contract for this upcoming legislative session. I mean, as we've had conversations before, usually you hire a lobbyist if there is one or two particular bills or areas in which you really want to hammer home on that we really support this or we are really against this. And I don't think we've really undertaken the effort to like draft our own legislation and have our representatives write it, and then thus necessitating us spending money on a lobbyist to go on our behalf to other state representatives and senators to try and get it across the finish line or whatever. I think in terms of, for number 3, council communication, I think that the setup of, 2 council meetings per month from February to June with virtual updates every 3 weeks, which is basically what we've been doing, is fine with me. I think for right now that works, because we also don't know what's in store with the legislative session. As it relates to the shared definition, so number 1 now, the shared definition and understanding of impact. I think it's appropriate that bills that do directly impact CCOB as an entity, we do take formal positions on, and staff does that deep dive. And I think for those that do not directly impact us, either staff doesn't do necessarily that deep dive, or they just do a very cursory glance, whatever they feel is appropriate based on what the substance of the bill is. I think that's entirely appropriate, and we obviously are more than welcome to lobby on our own behalf for a particular bill if we deem it necessary. But I do think there are certain bills that don't necessarily have a direct impact on Broomfield itself, but have a larger goal of forwarding certain principles for the city and county of Broomfield that council has deemed. And I think for some of those, it might be appropriate for council to take a position on if we deem it necessary. So I think one bill that comes to mind is stuff that related to mineral rights and oil and gas stuff last session. I think it's important that we take that position, but I don't necessarily think we need to have that same deep dive on staff's end, if that makes sense. Kind of puzzled. So if that doesn't make sense, let me know. And then as it relates to the membership organizations, I think we should still be members of all the ones that are listed, even though I think Mayor Castrota has kind of mentioned something about Northwest mayors and commissioners, but she's not here, so I won't speak for her on that. Obviously, the big one that stands out for, I think, most of council is CCI, given its total investment. I don't think staff needs to be on every call. I think maybe an approach similar to what you do with CCAP, where if there's a particular bill that they're going to be discussing that is pertinent to Broomfield or is really important, then hopping on that call just to see what that conversation looks like would be beneficial. But yeah, there were plenty of bills that were discussed that why do we need to have a staff member there to discuss something about open lands in rural Colorado up in the mountains? I mean, it's important for Colorado, but it's not something that we have a direct impact and relationship with. So I think scaling back some of that application, and I think we as council members sitting in that capacity as commissioners should be able to read a bill, synthesize that bill, and kind of make a quick determination. And in saying that, I do think it's important that we kind of revisit council procedures to more align our procedures with the stance that council members can take votes without needing a formal vote of the body in order to take a position for bills that really are not super impactful for Broomfield, but still the organization itself wants to take a position. And with that, my time is up.
All right, any other questions, comments from council members? Councilmember Anderson.
All right, so this is helpful, and I wonder if this is the year where we just keep these memberships and we do a little a little bit deeper dive on how beneficial they are and how we can make this reduce the amount of staff effort that is required. And I wonder, and then just thinking about this as we're going, as I'm listening to their comments, I wonder if there's an opportunity here where any council members, especially those appointed to a committee, if there's an opportunity to take, like, have 6 separate meetings with, not to add more work, but to like meet with staff, like at the very beginning of this upcoming legislative session, just say, what does this look like? Do we feel confident? Like CC4CA is the place I've spent the most time. And do we feel, Councilmember Lim and I, do we feel confident that the two of us on there listening, do we it's, from my perspective, I don't think I need, maybe staff doesn't need to be on, but maybe staff feels differently and maybe staff feels that they need to be on. I don't know what that looks like, but there might be an opportunity to say, we're good. Like, we don't need like staff on. It's you can join if you want, but it's not required. I wonder if there's an opportunity. And then also, as we think a little bit more about the number of opportunities, I mean, this is a testament to Broomfield that we have a lot of experience in this area when we're asked repetitively to testify, but we can, if we do that early on meeting and meet with staff and just say, okay, what is this going to look like? And if we are asked to testify, if we can write our own talking points, maybe we need to do more, like lessen some of the load on staff there. I don't know, but there might be a chance to just see, can we do this without a ton of staff effort? But the place where it always gets tricky is when we bring something forward and the only way for staff to really understand is to do that deep dive. And that's where we run into trouble. But there's times where we as a council can take a position without using staff's time. That would be amazing. But I don't know if we can get there because we don't always know all the intricacies of how that really will impact us. But I do agree. So that was my only thought there. But on the questions, I don't have them in front of me, but I think I'm good. I'm good to keep the memberships. What were the questions? You have them still here.
Can you put the questions up on the slide, please? On the screen.
There's 2 slides, just go in order really quickly.
The first one was, impact, direct impact versus indirect impact. There you go. Membership organizations and then communication.
Yeah. Oh, the first one was the 10%, and I'm fine with those designations, and I think it's going to be easier said than done to figure out exactly which ones are the ones we should take positions on, because they do have broader impacts. And I'll just reiterate this from the last conversation we had, was sometimes bills take 2 or 3 years to really get to that point. So just because something didn't pass in that legislative session doesn't mean it wouldn't have passed. But I think we can look at, I'm okay taking a full-on council support position or not support based upon just the ones that have that absolute direct impact on CCOB, but when they have impacts on our constituency, for example, like air quality, and for me to be able to go in there just as myself, make the comments, I am okay with that. And that I think that would lessen the load a lot, because we spent a lot of time trying to take council positions, and I don't know if it really makes a difference or just going in and making the comments on your own behalf, if that's adequate. So, and then we can reevaluate again at the end of this next legislative session and see if we've been able to lessen the load. But I don't want to require more staff time. I want to lessen the load, not increase it. So I think that was all of them. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lim.
So question number 1, I think that's up on the slide right now. How quickly would we have an indication from staff if the bill impacted Broomfield or not? Do you have to do that deep dive, or can you make a quick assessment of this doesn't impact Broomfield, so we all kind of know, okay, we're on our own kind of thing?
Thank you, Councilmember Lim, for the question. That's a very hard one to answer because it depends on the bill. But I would say this is where the professional membership organizations are critical for staff. So typically, for example, I use public safety. Chief Hempelman will be aware of bills that may have significant impact because of those membership organizations. She'll flag them, and then we would look at them a little deeper. For example, the assessor with the property taxes. So that's also the other added benefit of a contract lobbyist is as bills are introduced, I think last session we had over 700, they kind of are doing that cursory look to see if they may impact us, may not, and we'll flag ones that fit within our principles and priorities. And then we can look and see if a deeper dive is needed. So there's many ways for us to determine if we need to look at it, but I would say we largely depend on our professional membership organizations and then the lobbyists to flag those for us before we do the deep dive.
Okay. I mean, I'm fine with the definition of or the understanding of the direct impact to Broomfield. Question 2 was, now I'm lost. My
We advance
membership.
the slide, please. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Structure and staff support related to council's membership organizations. I know that staff has been present on the CC4CA legislative meetings, but I don't recall that we requested that. So that's kind of, I'm not connecting the request part. I know they've been on it, but I don't recall requesting it. And I asked Councilmember Anderson and she didn't either. So, they don't have to be on there. I think it's nice, but they don't have to be. And yeah, and we can write our own talking points. I mean, Councilmember Anderson and I have written our own talking points in the past, and it's usually was a case of staff, is there anything that is a problem that we're saying in relation to Broomfield? So if we have some indication of what Broomfield considers as directly related to Broomfield, then we wouldn't need to ask anybody to look at our talking points. So that understanding would be helpful there if we have that understanding. CCAT, under the circumstances right now with other responsibilities, I'm the alternate for CCAT, and I have been attending the legislative subcommittee meetings this month, and then they're having a retreat on November 7th and 8th. So I intend to attend that retreat. And, that hasn't involved staffs, that I know of so far. I haven't seen staff on those legislative committee meetings. What both CC4CA and CCAT have emphasized, I guess I wanted to present to staff, was that all of these entities and individual local governments have to be ready to defend budgets, budget items with JBC. So that's, I guess, my question to staff is, okay, I know CC4CA has that as their top priority. I know CCAT and every committee this month has been saying this has to be the #1 priority, and every committee is to be ready to, so we don't get any more unfunded mandates from undoing things that we thought were budgeted. So is that what staff sees as the priority for the 2025 legislative session? And what does staff see that Broomfield needs to make sure Broomfields doesn't get these unfunded mandates?
I'm going to take the first shot at that, Councilmember Lim. I think the next 2 years are going to be all about the JBC. My last 7 years prior to getting this job, when I was still had my contract with Community Corrections, I shifted my very last decade to do, I didn't even spend any time with the senators or the House reps. I only focused on the JBC. And it's a philosophical approach that if all of these organizations aren't taking that same philosophical approach for the next 2 years, when you're looking at, as you mentioned, a $900 million deficit, there's going to continue to be that push for additional legislation. And then there's going to be a push for, we're going to figure it out as we go, which really has been the last 2 legislative sessions, is where we're going to implement. Sounds good, feels good. We think that it's good. And then you have to deal with not only the unfunded mandates are really going to be number 3 on the top 3 list. They're going to have to balance that budget. And the way they're going to balance that budget is with projects and programs that we're all aware of. So really those unfunded mandates, I think, are going to even be less of a conversation. Being cognizant of when you ask what can Broomfield do for the unfunded mandates, I even think from a collective force, I don't know how much in the 30 years that I've been paying attention to legislation, there hasn't been a secret recipe not to have unfunded mandates. I think next session is going to be it's going to be an unusual one in that it's going to be, and you've said it already from CCAT and CC4CA, which is, we just need to hold on to what we have. We're not even asking for anything else. We're not asking for scope creep. We're not asking for additional deep. We just need to hold on to the funding that we have now. And it's going to be almost impossible for these large, CDPHE is going to be first on the block, first on the cutting block. So again, I think the focus is, as we've talked about before, if we spread ourselves, even if we pick 10 topics, 5 of them we're not even going to do very well. 2 of them we're going to be able to focus on, and the other 3 are kind of going to be hit or miss. So to Danae's point about really agreeing on what is that definition of, does it impact Broomfield? So I think it's a different definition, Councilmember Lim, and you're right on the money, no pun intended, that it is going to be about the JBC. And so in my mind's eye, as soon as you said that, it's the calendaring for the JBC. So when they come for comebacks, when they come for that original summary, right? I mean, the JBC hits after they get done with all their preliminary meetings that they're having right now. I think that's where our laser focus is on the JBC. So it's not unlike you follow the money. And these other efforts and these lobbying organizations, when they are short-staffed, they become heavily reliant on communities like ours that have a stellar staff. And we're already starting to get the calls. What do you guys think about this? What does this look like? How are you working this? Can you share your model? Can you have your folks take a look at this? And it's hard to say no. So again, if we can agree on the front end that from an impact to Broomfield, and I'm just thinking through this in my head, it's going to be a very different legislative session for exactly what you said, Councilmember Lim. It's going to be holding on bare knuckle to what those top items are, and less about the one-off legislation that's going to come, especially if some of these, especially on the outcome of the November election on some of these taxes and propositions, and our topography, it's going to look very different. The conversation that we're having right now, we'll probably really wish that we were having in December, because it's going to seem so light and fluffy, and how are we going to do, what we've been doing in the past? That is not what we're walking into next year. And I know that that doesn't help any of this conversation whatsoever. Danae? I think and I'm going to speak for Danae, we have to have a lobbyist. It's just, we just have to get better at the kind of the roles and responsibilities on the front end from the screening. There isn't any indication there's going to be less than 700 bills again, but we know it ebb and flows, right? So those first 6 weeks, generally, you're going to have 80% of your bills, probably a little higher than that. And then your big topic items aren't going to come until the 11th hour, which happens every legislative session. So that screening process is going to be key.
Question 3 for your communication plan, I'm fine with. The lobbyists, well, I have a different perspective from when I read the memo about the lobbyist and what I was thinking about the lobbyists. So it doesn't seem like we need the lobbyist to, like Councilmember Ward was saying, to push a certain piece of legislation, but you seem to indicate you need it for the screening. So that's a different perspective. I guess we do need the lobbyist then, but we need less staff time, I'd say, to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I am all for the definition of impact. I think keeping that a lot tighter is going to be very valuable. I will also say that I think it is kind of nice to have established what we will remain silent on, because I do personally enjoy when it doesn't intersect with other things, to be able to actually lend my name to certain things, indicate I'm an elected official, but not represent myself as speaking for Broomfield. I actually think that provides us with a lot more flexibility. So I think that's really great. The membership organizations, I guess we stay in all of these for now, but I really think that as folks in leadership roles on these organizations start to peel off, that's a great time to reevaluate. That's what I would say. I would feel pretty bad yanking one of my colleagues off of something that they feel like they're getting a lot of value out of. But I mean, I'm saying this coming from the position of the fact that I do not have a chill day job. And so there are not many circumstances in which I would be able to step up and do any of these things. And so it also does not feel right to insist that we remain in all of them, from my perspective. So that's that. Communication to council. So kind of in the similar spirit of I do not have a chill day job. I appreciate all of the outreach you have done. I will also admit that those 3-week, those additional touch points that you have, I've never been able to take advantage of. And so they don't serve me any value. And so as a result, I would never personally ask any of you to be doing that either. So I would personally be very comfortable with just the council updates. I think that provides us with the summary we need. However, I think I'm very much in the minority on that one. And then similar to previous colleagues, I was also assuming we could just nix the external lobbyist, but now given the feedback from Manager Hoffman, it sounds like we still do need that person. I am okay with going with that as long as we limit kind of the scope of things. Hopefully the 1 through 3 will help us get to a better, more efficient place. This is also said, I guess one more note while I'm ruminating on this. I get that coalition building is tricky. So again, in contrast with my day job, everything is easily quantifiable in certain spaces. And this is not a space where things are easily quantifiable. And so I think while it's great to ask for that ROI and it's still an important data point, there is inherently, I think this is a very squishy field. So I do want to acknowledge that. that my colleagues who still see a lot of value in a lot of this stuff. I do not think that that perspective is wrong by any means. But I do hope that we can just get staff out of this as much as possible. And again, if I'm not willing to step up for certain things or not willing to attend certain things, I would also not be willing to ask that of staff or anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm a strong believer in the value of a lobbyist. They do so much more than quote lobby. They help build partnerships. They help strengthen positions. They help communicate to people we can't get to. Our positions, I agree with the city manager. I think a lobbyist is really important. I think that the memberships are fine. Again, that's the place where we build coalitions. That's the place where we add strength to positions that we may want to support or oppose. And opposition is almost more important than the support part of these things, as we know. In terms of the review of the bills, I do think we need a weekly update. I do think that the mayor and the city manager probably should take the lead on what positions we take with our input. I disagree that if there is a council member that has an individual interest, that there shouldn't be any staff support. What I do think is that council member should bring that to the body, and we should decide whether we all agree it should be supported, then get that support. If not, and that council person wants to stand on her or his own, that's fine. Let them do that. I agree with that. No staff support for that. But I do think that should come to the council first and give us a chance to understand what that person is trying to do, to achieve, and give us that opportunity. But I do think the mayor and the city manager need to lead that. They're both in positions more so than the rest of us to be actively engaged in the organizations and the communications that bring to life what these legislative efforts are about. So, but at the same time, I don't want a 3-hour presentation on all the bills. That's not a criticism. It's just, I think going forward, we can get written updates and then maybe an opportunity at council meetings during the session where we can ask some questions about certain bills that are perhaps most critical to us. But I don't think, Benet should have to come before us and give a long overview of everything. We can read it. And many of us are involved in some aspect of it based on the committees. I serve on the Chamber of Commerce has got positions, et cetera, et cetera. Each of us serves on those kinds of things. So I think we can add that to our conversation during meetings, but I don't think it has to be every meeting. So that's kind of my lathering response.
Thank you. Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I don't have any questions, so I will just give instruction. I guess that's okay. I think that the current obligations that the council does already, I think it suffices. Obviously, I'm kind of a bit indifferent with having a lobbyist, just because I know sometimes some lobbyists will have a lot of influence than others, and that's always tricky because lobbyists, depending on who they are, will have better connections than others. So I'm just kind of indifferent on that. But I actually do appreciate the updates that you give us. I think that, for my first term here, first year as a city council member, I think, I get more information than I get from working government because I'm still a state employee. And so I think it does help us give us an idea or a pulse of, the legislative items that are happening in our state legislative body. As for the JBC, I agree. I think the JBC is going to have more an effective role, especially the next few years, just because of the reasons mentioned before, with budget cuts potentially, with deficits. I just think that we definitely need more of an eye on them, just because they're going to make some big decisions that's going to impact all of Colorado, not just Broomfield. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member questions or comments? I'll put my few thoughts out there. You know, when I looked at this item, I thought that you know, my first thought was we cannot continue to do the status quo that we have this last year. It was intensive for staff. I would hate to utilize FTEs that could go to other programs and departments and utilize them for reviewing state legislation. Much of it doesn't affect the CCOB organization as a whole. But it sounds like for my council colleagues that we would like to continue moving down somewhat of the status quo. I think that we have to focus on the impact of the CCOB organization, not the city and county of Broomfield residents and everybody that either works here, lives here, or owns a business here. But we have to focus on the organization itself. I think that, you know, it doesn't sound like that staff needs to be part of the membership organization meetings. Those membership organization meetings can be, you know, staffed by council, that we don't have to have staff attending those meetings. It's kind of what I'm hearing from my council colleagues. So I don't think that some of those hours that were expelled this last session, that those need to continue. So it sounds like that staff can really pull back from those membership meetings. The rationale for having a lobbyist is really to find out what are those bills that are going to impact CCOB organization itself, and ensuring that council is aware of those bills. I don't think that we need to have the weekly meetings. It sounds like that would be repetitive if we're having information delivered about those bills on a regular basis. Those are most likely going to be bigger bills. So having those weekly updates, I just don't know if it's going to be utilized, and from past, you know, experience and past, you know, viewing of those, not a lot of council members were able to attend those, not a majority at least. So wanting to remove staff as much as possible from kind of the day-to-day of those membership organizations, at least that's kind of what I'm hearing. And it sounds like that we want to continue with all of those membership organizations that we are already involved in. So removing staff, I think, is a good move, and that reduces the impact. So that's it for me. Looking to staff, do we have enough direction? Do we have enough ideas on where this program is going next?
I think from that recap, we do, Mayor Pro Tem. So we will not plan on staffing unless there's a specific item that requires a deeper dive. And I can also say that the lobbyists that we're entertaining also has local governments versus some, whether it be associations or nonprofits. When you have a lobbyist that specializes in local governments, they understand what's important to all of us collectively. So it helps them with that initial kind of frontline screening perspective. So we'll be able to clearly define what it is, what their roles and responsibilities are versus what staff's role and responsibilities are. I think building in those updates, and obviously if there is something that is happening that requires a deeper level of engagement, which there unequivocally will be, we know that will happen. We'll remain flexible and agile, and we appreciate the opportunity to pull back so that when we do need to lean in, we'll have the capacity in order to do that and spend our time wisely. So thank you.
Yeah, and I want to make a note for what Councilmember Ward said, which is we may have to do some changes to our rules and procedures in order to allow that flexibility within membership organizations.
I think one of the examples was when council wasn't prepared to take a position yet. You all agreed, and the mayor indicated that our chief of police was able to take a position based on her role as a chief of police, similar to that. Knowing that we're going to continue to have that openness and flexibility. Councilmember Anderson and Councilmember Lim, I mean, they could school all of us with regards to air quality monitoring and plugged and abandoned wells and that entire arena. So again, those areas of expertise and continuing to remain flexible and agile is kind of what's made us successful in the past. And I don't foresee next legislative session to be any different.
Manager Hoffman, if I may, I do have a couple of points just to clarify. So really quick on the membership organization. So I heard the recap saying stay in all of them. Staff will attend as needed. There was a comment about reviewing the agendas and providing the summaries for CCI. So I just wanted to follow up on that, if that was a direction of council to do that for CCI. It wasn't listed for the others, or if it's just attend meetings as needed. I just wanted to clarify the direction on that piece.
I think that from what I heard, it was for staff to step back from all membership organizations.
Thank you. Okay, and then we have the direction of impact and communication, the last piece on communication then. So I heard weekly updates, preferred written, and then with hybrid updates as needed at council meetings. So both oral and verbal communications as needed. Okay.
I want to minimize the oral. I just don't think that we need it that much. I think a written statement, if there's some bill coming that requires some immediate action, like you said, the flexibility, the ability to take a deeper dive, to bring staff back into something as may be required. But I don't think staff need to spend so much time preparing for oral presentations and giving those to us. I just don't think that was that valuable.
So I think the intent is that that the written is much more of all of the bills and give us an idea of the overview. The oral is much more of when it's a deep dive needed and a discussion to really iron out those details of those bills that have a significant impact to CCOB. Is
Appreciate
that kind
that
of what you were thinking
clarification.
too? Okay. Councilmember Henkel.
One last thing. I know we have to get going. I appreciate the time tonight to speak to all of us. I would like to say that, and maybe this is sort of the elephant in the room too, that if you have a new city council member, there's going to be a little bit more of a staff support though. So I would like to say that there's a lot of seasoned people up here, but if we had all new council members, there is going to be some staff support, I would think, when you enter into these groups. So if we're still a part of CCI and we have a new city council member, that might shift, just to give that. I mean, there's a reason why Guyleen or Mayor Castriata does a lot of the work, is because she's seasoned. She understands a lot of where the power goes. And if we have new people on council, they might need some more initial support. So in the future, that should be a part of the conversation. Thanks.
All right. Anything further on this item?
Mayor Pro Tem, can
Yes.
I ask for a quick thumbs up, not conversation? We do normally host a preview legislative breakfast. The attendance for that and for the dinner in March has been sparse over the last few years, and it does take significant staff effort. Can I just get a thumbs up or thumbs down of if you would like a legislative preview breakfast in December? Is that a desire of council?
I would agree. I would agree.
Okay. It's not a, yeah, okay. Thumbs down. Okay, I see consensus that that's not needed, and same sentiments for the legislative dinner in March. Okay,
Ready?
one. All right, we will not, legislative dinner, sorry, thumbs for dinner in March. We'll okay, we will
Let's
not. pla-
revisit
Yeah,
that and see kind of where we are when we're closer to that.
perfect, but we will not plan
On
a
the
legislative
breakfast.
breakfast then.
I think it's what the intent of those breakfasts and dinners are.
Mhm.
Is it an opportunity for us as a council body to engage with our representative, our senator? Maybe that is an opportunity that's worthwhile, but is it a bigger discussion with more people? I don't know if that's the best use of time and resources. So I think it's really comes down to what that intent of that is. What is the goal of that? And I think that for some of us, we have the ability to go down to the State House and visit with our representative. But as a body, I don't know if we get that opportunity all the time to engage with our representative and senator as a body.
Thank you.
I don't know if that helps at all.
Does, thank you.
All right. Well, that concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any other business to come before the council for my council colleagues or staff?
Mayor Pro Tem, I just wanted to, where the mayor is right now, so they told us to stay top secret, secret decoder ring kind of stuff. So Broomfield, so on top of being the #1 rated Colorado community and the #4 rated healthiest community, we received the Eddie Award, which is the Economic Development Council of Colorado's Large Community Award tonight. And so it's an economic development excellence for the work that has been done over the last 12 months with outreach, engagement, structure, the balanced approach, the ratios. We'll have more information on it, but just want to let you all know that they're going to be putting out a press release, and we didn't want council to get after the press release came out. So we'll have more of an announcement on next Tuesday evening, but it's a big deal and one that that staff is very excited about, and it was a welcomed email.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. So any other updates or anything to come before council? Seeing none, the